This program deals with devil worship and satanic beliefs. It contains explicit scenes and descriptions of violent crimes and rituals.
Americans are asking who attacked our country.
You have declared a subliminal jihad against the United States. Can you tell us why?
Some folks are born made to wave the flag. Ooh, they're red, white, and blue. And when the band plays hail to the chief, ooh, they point the cannon at you. Lord, it ain't me. It ain't me. I ain't no senator, son. It ain't me. It ain't me. I ain't no fortunate one. No. Some folks are born silver spoon in hand. Lord, don't they help themselves, y'all? But when the tax man comes to the door, Lord, the house look like a rummage sale, yes. It ain't me. It ain't me. I ain't no millionaire son, no, no. It ain't me. It ain't me. I ain't no fortunate one, no.
Everything pertaining to what's happening has never come to the surface. The world will never know the true facts of what occurred, my motives.
Night fell in a different world.
And Iblis is thinking, I should be getting this position, not Adam, and this guy's created from dirt.
How does the army feel about you being head of the Temple of Set?
And the conspiracy theorists can say what they will, but
I want you to give me power over Adam, and I want you to give me soldiers and minions and all of these things.
Those heads that have so much to gain and have such an ulterior motive for putting a position on me will never look the true facts and come back more to the world.
And who was the grotto leader? Don't remember his name. You don't remember the name of the person who involved you in murder?
Now these people are in very high positions, yeah. Yes.
I ain't no fortunate one.
Welcome back to Subliminal Jihad, episode 125. I am your co-host, Dimitri,
I'm Khalid.
and today we're picking up right where we left off with our extremely big boy chapter of Contra 7,
Yes.
which
Big, supersized for a big boy.
very
Um,
supersized.
Yeah. Not like Michael Bloomberg. He won't stop you from having supersized meals and big sodas. He's a big boy. He understands that you need, you know.
Exactly. That's authentically populist, etc.
Yes, exactly.
But
The most populous thing is like, you know, endorsing, like letting people have gigantic, like 2-liter Cokes. That's like true populism, and like trying to take them away is not. And that's
love
the
getting past
that's
the
difference between
superficial.
socialism and exactly. It's proletarian to drink a 2-liter bottle, but it's service work if
to serve it
Yeah.
is not. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Right.
Yeah, we are in the wilderness of irony still, as you can tell. And, it was a supersized episode, probably part 1 and part 2 people have listened to at this point. And today we're sitting down to go through, I guess, part 3 and part 4, because we already know it's going to be that long. And this is a pretty dense history. I think where we left off, we just started talking about the very mysterious Castle Bank and Trust in the Bahamas in the 1970s, and how the IRS had discovered that they were essentially a tax dodging sort of money laundering bank for, to a large extent, wealthy account holders in the United States. They were trying to duck paying their taxes. And I think we mentioned at the very end, the single largest account depositor in the Castle Bank and Trust was the Pritzker family. We also said that going on both in the narrative of Alan Bloch's Masters of Paradise and really up to the early 2000s, and in a certain sense up to today, one of the two principals of Castle Trust, Burton W. Cantor, ended up pretty much managing the Pritzker wealth, both of the Pritzker family trust and its literally hundreds of subsidiary corporations, up through his death in the early 2000s, and managed to save them conservatively at least over $100 million on inheritance taxes, and not to mention income taxes or anything else that they are required by law to pay, but I guess they haven't for the last 50 years. But I think we decided today, before jumping back into Masters of Paradise, because we haven't, really dug into a lot of direct dirt on the Pritzkers yet, maybe we'd start with that. And maybe, within this Contra episode, we're going to do a little mini history of the Great American Fortunes segment here to start out with the Pritzker family, because maybe some of you are still wondering, who is this family? How did they become billionaires? Like, who the fuck are they?
Yes, their involvement in, we're in the middle of reading Masters of Paradise by Alan A. Block, and we got to a certain point where we're sort of like getting into the meat of the matter. The Pritzker connection won't come in until a little bit. But I mean, I for myself just wanted to note where we left off, where we were just kind of talking about, we kind of started to riff a little bit about JB Pritzker and his surge, quote unquote, surging popularity of polling at 2% in polls of likely Democratic voters as people who they would support in the primary.
6 cents on Predicted right now. He is a 6% shot according to the bettors. So I shouldn't even say that. I don't want to tip people off, but
pump
it now.
Yes.
But yeah.
So, and we were discussing whether what is so exciting about all of his policies, and we were talking about his not support for Medicare for all, which is imaginary and chimerical. It's just been sort of suggested that what if he did and how great that would be, but he never really gave any indications that direction. People were pointing to his support for a $15 minimum wage, which every single Democrat supports, including Joe Biden. I think if Joe Biden were governor, I'm sure that he would support such a thing in whatever state he was governor of. I guess Delaware would be. Yeah, I mean, and that's something that many Democratic governors across the country have taken steps to implement or set a timeline for. And then we started talking about something that a lot of his big fans on the sort of irony dirtbag sphere have pointed to, which is, of course, his legalization of marijuana, obviously the most socialist thing that you can do. Very important.
Absolutely. I have to say, I almost even tutted at you. I wouldn't say I ermed you, but I almost tutted a little bit.
I deserved it a bit because I was out of the loop, and my point does stand, because I said it would be different if he had some kind of expungement program where he was expunging weed convictions. But in fact, he does. But my initial point does stand, which is that it doesn't really set him apart, because every Democratic governor who has some kind of, at this point, every Democratic governor who has some kind of marijuana legalization initiative generally pairs that. They've listened, they've learned, and they have some kind of expungement program. Some of them are better than others. I think Massachusetts is really bad, and Illinois is not great. I did read one article that said especially since the pandemic, something 25% of all the expungement petitions that are filed ran into some kind of problem. So it's not this sort of grand jubilee that it might be portrayed as.
Not a mass pardon
by Pritzker's team. Yeah, exactly.
Which honestly, that would probably almost be a more efficient way to do it.
It would be, and it would be better,
and I'll sign it. Basically.
But no, exactly. It's kind of what we had said that it was probably some kind of means tested bullshit thing.
It turns out, yep, it is. And actually, I mean, I couldn't have even predicted it. The fact that we talked about that,
in the process
and then what you found afterwards. And but by the way, I just want to read from Capital News, Illinois, how, because I think he signed this bill in 2020, but this is how it was marketed when JB Pritzker, legalized marijuana. Pritzker signs, quote, most equity-centric marijuana legalization bill in the nation. So it was made legal in January 2020, and his supporters, this most equity-centric. This legislation lives true to the promise to bring justice, equity, and opportunity throughout our state, Lieutenant Governor Juliana Stratton said, by including components focused on repairing the harm caused by the failed war on drugs and decades of policies that cause mass incarceration. Illinois is a national leader with a policy that's a national model. So I guess what makes JB so different is the legalization effort made Illinois the 11th state in the U.S. to legalize marijuana, but the first to pass a comprehensive legislation package through the legislature rather than a ballot initiative. So again, very symbolic, but the fact that he got it passed through the legislature instead of other states where they just voted on it. Like, wow, what a legislative accomplishment, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, wow.
And, he says, this is what JB had to say about it. As the first state in the nation to fully legalize adult use cannabis through the legislative process, Illinois exemplifies the best of democracy, a bipartisan and deep commitment to better the lives of all of our people. He said during the signing ceremony at the Sankofa Cultural Arts and Business Center, quote, legalizing adult use cannabis brings an important and overdue change to our state, and it's the right thing to do. Now, well,
wow.
That's interesting that he thinks that, right? It's interesting that he thinks that. Well, you found something.
I was trying to do like a little bit of self-crit, because I know that he's the reincarnation of Chairman Mao and everything. And I wanted to learn more about his expungement program and his, legalizing marijuana, and to sort of, do a little struggle session with myself to just make sure that I was correct with everything that I was thinking about Pritzker, and that I wasn't having any unfair negative thoughts of this working class billionaire. And in the process of that, I came across this lawsuit that has been filed by a group. What are they called? They're called True Social Equity in Cannabis. Mm-hmm. Despite the name, no association with Trump's social network. It's just, I think they are appealing to the idea that there should be real social equity in cannabis, in contrast to what actually exists in Illinois right now. Because according to their lawsuit, a cartel of influential large companies, including a company associated with the family of Governor J.B. Pritzker, they accuse them of exploiting political connections to improperly dominate Illinois' marijuana marketplace.
Yep,
this is from the Cook County Record, by the way. It's an article by Jonathan Billick on April 20th, 2022. Yeah, so the complaint identifies defendants as Green Thumb Industries, the Akerna Corporation, Certerra Holdings Inc., Verano Holdings Corporation, and Ildisp LLC, a group of companies the complaint labeled collectively as a Chicago cartel. The complaint asserts the Chicago cartel have conspired to allegedly pretend to be competitors when they have actually collectively monopolized the sale of recreational marijuana in Illinois, driving the price of marijuana to levels not seen in other states that have legalized and regulated the sale and use of recreational marijuana. And I did see people I looked into this a little bit further. I saw people on Reddit saying, or, even in the comments on this article saying things like, wow, that explains why the price of weed is still so high here, because it does bear itself out. It's true. What
were the numbers again? There was something ridiculous, compared to California. I don't remember,
but it's it says the complaint asserts that a pound of marijuana that sells for $300 in California can fetch more than $4,000 in Illinois.
Cool.
Jeez. Okay,
very equitable.
Amazing.
Very fucking
great.
equitable.
Equity. The complaint claims that the companies are all connected to the Pritzker, Wrigley, and Kovler families. The Pritzker family, including Illinois Governor Pritzker, gained their fortunes largely from the Hyatt brand of hotels, among other interests. The Wrigley family from their chewing gum and candy companies, and the Kovler family from various business interests, including the Jim Beam bourbon fortune. See, there you go, alcohol. Getting into the weed business.
You were right. Yeah. The koof juice tycoons were fucking getting in on the marijuana industry to monopolize it.
Yes.
It's really that is really fucking wild. It's like a perfect illustration of what we're talking about, with a fake progressive guy from, a billionaire family that is using this kind of rhetoric of equity, inclusion, end the war on drugs, while he's monopolizing the very thing that is going to be, legalized, and then profiting off reaping super profits off of it by forming, borderline illegal monopolies.
It's really interesting how this, comes to light, and it just serves to explain all these some strange things, like the fact that people have been complaining previously that it's really hard for, despite all the expungement and stuff like that, to try to have an equity focused rollout of legal weed. People have found it to be very hard to get licenses to sell weed. I think that a lot of advocacy groups for people of color have complained about that, that it's usually the sort of established businesses and, the established people who are established in other industries who are able to easily transition into, also dealing in cannabis, whereas people who are trying to get new licenses for businesses have had a lot of difficulty and run into a lot of roadblocks in Chicago and Illinois mysteriously. mysteriously.
Yeah, I mean, mysterious.
And then,
you know
what do you
I-
know? Like, and also, like, why is the price of weed so high? And then it just turns out to be like this weird scam,
Right, and,
by a bunch of like interconnected companies from people who pretend that they're competing when actually they're all collaborating and conspiring to enrich each other and themselves
as a cartel. And this even, I think, just to be specific, it is the Akerna Corporation, which is traded on NASDAQ with the symbol Kern, that is owned by the Pritzker family. And I think specifically maybe by the Pritzker Group, which is run by J.B. Pritzker and his brother. So, they have splintered off into different directions, but also how convenient that, they're all cousins who are doing their own thing now. They have nothing to do with each other. We'll see that come up in interesting ways later. I actually managed to, I can't even find that Chicago, the Cook County Journal article that you're quoting from on Google right now. That's how well it's been like SEO buried. There's a Bloomberg article, but I'm not a subscriber. I did find the actual lawsuit though. True Social Equity in Cannabis v. Akerna Corp. et al. It basically, it says this case seeks to redress anti-competitive conduct involving the, quote, Chicago cartel in the state-protected cannabis market in Illinois. The Chicago cartel state-protected cannabis operation was started in 2014 as part of a partnership between Michael McLean of the Madigan Racketeering Enterprise, Terrence Gaynor of the U.S. Capitol Police, and heir to the Jim Beam fortune. Wait.
Damn.
Terrence, the heir to the Jim Beam fortune, is a U.S. Capitol Police officer?
What the fuck? Very
I'm sorry. Actually, no, I'm sorry. I misread that. There, no Oxford comma. Terrence Gaynor of the U.S. Capitol Police and heir to the Jim Beam fortune, Benjamin Kovler. Okay, but they still had, it's bizarre that they had like a member of the U.S. Capitol Police engaged in this like weird cannabis cartel in Chicago. That's still like a very weird connection to have. Yeah, it says there was an Associated Press article, former U.S. Capitol Police chief, the chief, at ease with pot industry job in 2015. He got a call from Mike McLean, an old college friend and former Illinois state legislator. McLean had helped Green Thumb launch in Chicago, and he suggested Gaynor work with it to develop security measures. Interesting. So hiring somebody from like a prestigious position in like law enforcement in Washington, D.C. to like run, security for a kind of borderline legal, illegal business sounds a little bit like Robert Peliquin and Intertel, doesn't it?
Yes, it
typical
does.
shit.
Not new on the sun.
Yeah, so Akerna is controlled by the Pritzker family. Surterra is controlled by the Wrigley family. The Pritzkers, Wrigleys, and Kovlers are some of the wealthiest families in Chicago, and in fact, are some of the wealthiest families in the world. Despite this wealth, members of these families have decided to enter the lucrative but dangerous world of marketing, licensing, distributing, and selling marijuana in Illinois and the United States. The Chicago cartel has successfully monopolized the Illinois-branded marijuana market. Branded cannabis is the industry term for a group of marijuana products sold in state-protected retail locations and etc. Yeah, it says Akerna, Green Thumb, Verano, and Surterra are nominally horizontal competitors, but in fact collude together as part of the Chicago cartel. The cartel owns and operates cultivation, manufacturing, and retail dispensary businesses vertically integrated across limited legal supply markets, including Illinois. The cartel can control prices in these markets because supply and demand can be reasonably predicted and forecast by the Chicago cartel members who share price information and collude to charge monopolist prices. Akerna, here we go, the Pritzker company, is key to this information sharing about supply, demand, and price. Akerna is a company that provides technology to Chicago cartel members to track prices, supply, and demand in these state-protected marijuana markets. Akerna also obtains licenses for sellers in state-protected markets for valuable consideration as part of its, quote, clean sweep services. Akerna, quote, competes with Green Thumb, Verano, and Surterra to obtain the licenses in state-protected markets. The cartel charges supra-competitive prices for marijuana and charges the highest prices for marijuana in the United States, in Illinois. According to a member of the Chicago cartel operation, a pound of branded marijuana sells for $300 in California, but sells for over $4,000, like you said, in Illinois in 2022. So yeah, all these companies basically are interlocked. They've worked together for years to keep marijuana prices high in Illinois, in part through sharing supply, demand, and price information via the Pritzker company, Akerna. So, I mean, there you go. That's like a modern illustration right up to fucking today. Of course, maybe the lawyers, maybe, you know, Bert Cantor's acolytes who still represent the Pritzkers would say that's not proven. It's a scurrilous lawsuit. But, you know,
in fact, it got mysteriously dropped for no reason recently.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, for no stated reason. Like just 3 days ago, as of this recording.
Wow. Really?
Yeah, July 22nd, the organization accusing Verano Holdings Corp. and other large cannabis companies, including to monopolize the Illinois market, has ended its federal lawsuit, at least for now, according to a one-page filing submitted to the court. True Social Equity in Cannabis, a Chicago-based group critical to the state's licensing policies and execution, voluntarily dismissed its lawsuit roughly 2 months after submitting the complaint, alleging that Verano, Green Thumb Industries, Surterra Holdings Inc., and Akerna Corp. were violating antitrust laws. U.S. District Drug Mary M. Rowland signed off on the request on Friday. This article's paywalled, but the last thing that it says is the notice does not say why the organization. So I assume there's no stated reason. I wonder. Yeah.
I wonder if they had.
But there's a lot of things you could do to encourage that to happen.
Yeah, it could not to cast any aspersions on that equity in cannabis group. I mean, I think they did us all a service by filing that lawsuit. But
light. Yeah,
I would really love to know what made them change their mind so suddenly.
Yeah.
Maybe Socialists for Pritzker reached out to them and like, dude, come on, he's a big boy. He whips ass.
Yeah,
like, stop.
exactly.
You know, and they're like, oh, you're right. He is the best person that could beat
ass.
Trump in 2024.
True.
Withdraw.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, but I think it illustrates also something very, an essential truth about the Pritzker family. Because I think after reading that, and of course in Masters of Paradise, it alludes many times, and it does trace the personal connections between like organized crime associates and the Pritzker family, and the overlapping associates, people like Burton Cantor and others that all were kind of swimming in the same milieu. But it did make me kind of wonder, you know, where did the Pritzkers fucking come from? Like, because one thing I had noticed just reading a little bit about them in the last month is that they came relatively late to the game, almost like the Gettys in a way, where, you know, the Gettys really didn't blow up until they owned all that oil in like the early 20th century. And then they rocketed overnight to being like one of the wealthiest American families. The Pritzkers are kind of similar to that in that, you know, they only bought their first hotel, the Los Angeles LAX Hyatt, in I think 1957. Now they had already been successful business people in Chicago up to that point, but their trajectory from like 1957 to today is pretty fucking staggering. Like they turned a small to medium-sized American fortune into an extremely vast American fortune, and one that kind of put its tendrils into, as we've just said today, to like now into politics, into sponsoring, philanthropy and the arts and foreign policy. Certain, think tanks in Washington and foundations, get funded by them and all kinds of shit. So, where did they start? And then I was kind of going on a very labyrinthine kind of research thing last night, and I found this book, which definitely I think we could do an entire kind of solo episode on. But for the purposes of today's episode, all I did was Control F Pritzker in it. And it popped up like 60 or 70 hits. And so this book is called Supermob by Gus Russo, which came out in 2006. And it's really, the main focus of it is the mysterious lawyer Sidney Korshak, who I think we might have brought up before in kind of like weird scenes adjacent kind of stuff that we've researched. He was a very powerful Los Angeles-based attorney that originally was from Chicago, and he was always seen as kind of like the ultimate fixer and the ultimate kind of mob lawyer that kind of was always doing things behind the scenes. He has weird connections, I think, to like Robert Evans. I think we talked about that, the famous producer in the 70s. I think that like Korshak almost like selected him as like his guy in Hollywood. So it could bring up all kinds of weird thorny things about like The Godfather and like the new Hollywood era and all the things we've talked about so far with like the Lansky syndicates kind of infiltration and really like intermingling with Hollywood going way back, even to like the 30s, 40s, and 50s, and all that shit. So this book is like primarily about Korshak, but it's also about the milieu that he came out of and the kind of network that he fronted for his entire career in the 20th century. And it turns out that one of the main kind of figures in this kind of broader network from Chicago that Korshak was kind of working with was the Pritzker family, way back, from the beginning. And so this book, I'm just going to maybe go through a couple things that are in it to provide us some background and like history on the trajectory of the Pritzker fortune and how did they make all that money, because I think I thought, just going through it, control effing, that maybe I would find some Gustavus Myers kind of shit. And boy, did I ever. In fact, I found a lot of wild shit. I will try to not like take too much time on it, but it's going to underline like who the fucking Pritzker family is even before Castle Bank and all that stuff in the 70s. And, not even to talk about anything they're doing today, but like the origins of their fortune, it turns out kind of exist at this perfect nexus point between the respectable overworld and the dirty underworld of American capitalism. just want to read a little bit first because, you know, we are talking about Chicago, right? You know, this is really
that toddlin town.
That toddlin town, that windy fucking city that, like, everybody... I think I saw somebody on Twitter the other day who was like, everybody, like, calls Chicago, like, so corrupt, but it's like nobody like actually thinks about it. It's just like one of these weird cities where it has like such a legendary reputation for corruption, but like it never stopped. Like it's still really blatantly corrupt. But everyone kind of, especially because, you know, from everything I've heard and I've seen on social media, maybe the last month with all this Pritzker shit happening, is that actually what it seems like, you know, I think I said in the first part that it seemed like it was sort of like hipster, like DSA type people in like New York and LA that are most passionate about this like big boy Pritzker presidential run. But actually, I think the real nexus point of it is Chicago people, like Chicago progressives. They're the one. And I think it's like they're telling people they know on the coast. Like, it's just like Nathan J. Robinson said, you know, like I talked to my friends in Illinois and they said they're surprised that he is such a shockingly good governor and like blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
So it's like people think they're getting reports on the ground, but I wonder, it's like if there's anybody that was going to get bought off by Pritzker, it'd probably be the progressive activist in his home city. And we're about to see kind of how deep that fucking corruption goes.
Yeah. And I think it's like I think there's crossover actually between people who originate in the second city and then make their ways to the coast for their career, but remain like
Very
plugged
true.
into Chicago politics. I think that maybe that is like kind of the inception point of the whole like rising Pritzker phenomenon.
I think there definitely is a Chicago diaspora that, like maintains.
I mean, it's a big
ties.
city.
It is. It's huge.
Yeah.
It's a huge city. And it was very important. It was more important than California in the early 20th century. And in fact, as we'll see, a lot of the settlement, when Don Henley said in The Last Resort, some rich men came and raped the land. Nobody caught them. Put up a bunch of ugly boxes and Jesus people bought them. Well, I think we're about to find out, like, just who were those rich men that came and raped the land. I mean, we know about the 19th century cattle lords and the land thieves and all those silk toppers and the railroad guys. But in terms of building up like San Francisco and Los Angeles in kind of the early 20th century, you start to get this new group of businessmen operating on the scene. Now, we've talked so much before about the role of WASPs, right?
Mm-hmm.
And to quote the famous Chicagoan truth teller Gene Siskel,
they don't get enough shit. Basically, why? They don't.
They're called yuppies now.
They run the goddamn country, and all of our. I'm speaking to everyone who's eavesdropping right now. All of us.
Run the whole goddamn country, Gene. What about the international bankers?
Oh yeah.
Not to mention the Vatican.
No. I'm talking about they run...
And the commies.
No. They run the country. The WASPs run the country, and all of us should band together and overthrow them, and there could be...
You probably think our president
all
is a
have
WASP.
fun.
You think our president is a WASP, don't you?
No.
He isn't because he's Irish, so he's Celtic. You know that...
Yeah, but you know what I'm talking about. They're all Protestants. They've all been Protestants. You know that. Come on, band together, people. Let's overthrow the country.
Protestants, people who sort of want a religion. Let's stick together. The Catholics and the fucking Jews. We go back a few years together.
Come on. Hey, we're real. We're real. We get down and get dirty.
Listen, we were burning each other when Martin Luther was only a gleam in his mother's eye.
I'll take a Baptist. I go back 6,000 years. I want Baptist. Somebody that has some goddamn passion, some blood coursing through their veins.
Case closed.
Anything.
Right. Goddamn Protestants. Biggest thing that happens for them on Sunday is a bake sale.
No, they got to decide what color yellow tie to fucking buy.
That's right.
Gee, what should it be, lime green or dark green today, honey?
Right, the only fucking religion that has a Reader's Digest is a prayer book.
They don't get enough shit, and they have all the money. They have all the money.
All
those guys they're all running Northern Trust. They have all the banks on the South Street. It's all horseshit.
The only time Protestants get on their knees is to adjust the fucking TV set.
They have all the goddamn insurance companies. They have all the insurance companies. They run the government. They run everything.
You're right.
Steve Martin's new comedy. Oh, fuck.
Now get your energy up. Steve Martin's new comedy.
I already shot my wad on the Protestants.
Because they don't get enough shit, and they have all the money, And
yes,
he said they got all the banks and they got all the insurance companies, they got all the banks on LaSalle Street. It's all a bunch of horse shit, and he was right about. And he, himself was a Jewish man in Chicago saying that. So what you do see actually kind of changing between like early Gustavus Myers, like 17th, 18th, 19th century, is you do start to see a wider kind of ethnic representation in American business, both overworld and underworld, in the early 20th century. And probably the two most known groups that you could probably point to in terms of being a somewhat like ethnically cohesive kind of force in business would probably be Italians and Jews, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in this case, we are talking about almost exclusively, I think, kind of in this Supermob thing, when we talk about the Lansky Syndicate, it wasn't exclusively Jewish, because of course they did work with Lucky Luciano and Al Capone. There's like always a few Irish guys running around and stuff like that, but usually like what they would call white ethnics, like, and specifically there were these Jewish businessmen who started to, assume a prominent role. And of course, Pritzker is like one of these families. They are a Jewish American billionaire family. But, Chicago has its own interesting history with its Jewish population. And Russo kind of starts the book kind of talking about this one neighborhood called Lawndale, where a surprisingly high amount of like notable figures and business people and grew up and ended up kind of coming out of, including Sidney Korshak, I believe. But, you know, he talks about, there was actually an interesting kind of a like intra-class ethnic distinction in Chicago between the first Jewish immigrants who came over there probably in the mid-1800s, who were all German Jews. And often they came over with some money and they started a lot of businesses or became lawyers and things like that. And honestly, I mean, it's not a perfect comparison, but they're almost like the WASPs of the wider American Jewish community, at least like in the late 19th century, because in the late 19th century, there starts to be a huge flood of Eastern European Ashkenazi Jews that start to come from like the areas of like the Russian Empire, where of course there was like the Pale of Settlement and, you know, a lot of, you know, pogroms and persecution. It's a very shitty place to be Jewish.
Yeah, my mom's side of the family.
Okay, yeah, Eastern European Jews. So I wasn't aware of this till I started reading some like old history about Chicago, but there was like a very like strong like antagonism on the part of the older, more settled German Jews and these new Eastern European Jews that were coming over because they were poor. They spoke
no one
Yiddish.
That's wrong. I mean, I was exaggerating, but internalized anti-Semitism is very powerful. Did you ever see that play by Arthur Miller or read it? What's it called? Broken Glass? I think that's what it's called. Making sure. Yeah, Broken Glass. It's like a great portrait of, it's basically about a Jewish guy like on the eve of sort of the Holocaust, like living in America, I think in New York, like witnessing from afar all the things start to unfold in Germany, and his sort of self-hatred over being Jewish. And it's a good portrait. It shows like how there's a lot of like internalized anti-Semitism, I think, in the American Jewish community for sure.
Yeah,
where, like if they see like Jewish traits that like from their perspective, like they have purged or whatever, a lot of the time they're like the most outraged about that. Like I said, it's my mom's side of the family, so you know I'm not speaking from lived experience. So yeah, I think it's a common thing.
No, totally. I mean, it also reminds me of like the stories I would hear from it's not a direct comparison, but a little bit, because it is about American assimilation, but the class distinctions that I guess like maybe my Irish grandparents and great grandparents talked about, like living up in like Pennsylvania coal country, that there were two types of Irish people. There were lace curtain Irish and shanty Irish. And kind of the obsession with a lot of people was like you wanted to become lace curtain Irish because that meant you were respectable and serious and blah, blah, blah. Whereas like the shanty Irish, the working class, the poor Irish and stuff, and even a similar thing where I think the earlier Irish migrants to America, you know, I mean, there was obviously, you know, they weren't like the most loved group, but whatever. They were maybe a little more well off and more established than like the later waves of like potato famine people that were like very poor and ended up working in the coal mines. And so, you know, you could see this like kind of pressure cooker, the pressure to become quote white. I think we even mentioned it recently, like that book that like how the Irish became white. I think you could say the same thing about a similar thing about the Jewish community, where you could probably
same phenomenon basically happened.
Same phenomenon. It's like they basically became white, but like there was a fraught period in the 19th century where, you know, certain people, I think like for say the wealthier German Jews in Chicago, really tried to lean in and try to like waspify themselves. And when they saw all these like Russian Jewish immigrants come around, you know, in large numbers, and like you said, display these traits that they're trying to like downplay and get away from so they can be like not othered by like the silk toppers and shit. It's like, ew. And so there was like, yeah, very kind of strange like antagonism going on. And so Russo writes like,
but before you get it, I just thought this is a great example. I just went and looked up that play by Arthur Miller. Like the main character in this play is a guy named Gelberg, who's like, this is just a great example of this, you know? So he's talking to his doctor, and they're talking about how his wife will bring up the sort of what's happening in Germany. And the doctor says, I think she feels she annoys you when she brings it up. And he says, she doesn't annoy me, but what can be done about such things? The thing is, she doesn't like to hear about the other side of it. And the doctor asks, what other side? And he says, it's no excuse for what's happening over there, but German Jews can be pretty not that they're pushy like the ones from Poland or Russia, but a friend of mine's in the garment industry. These German Jews won't take an ordinary good job. It's got to be pretty high up in the firm or they're insulted and they can't even speak English. And the doctor says, well, I guess a lot of them were pretty important over there. And he replies, I know, but they're supposed to be refugees, aren't they? With all our unemployment, you'd think they'd appreciate a little more. Latest official figure is 12 million unemployed, and it's probably bigger, but Roosevelt can't admit it after the fortune he's pouring into the WPA and the rest of that welfare mashukas. But she's not annoying me, for God's sake. So you can see, this, I think that dynamic is something that resonates like very strongly. Like a lot of people who have observed it can speak to it. And in this case, it's actually German Jews who are, but he does say like it's not as bad as the ones from Poland or Russia.
We're all pushy. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, and because it's like most of the studio moguls who we talked about in like the Disney episode, who had this like weird, kind of ended up almost like recruiting Walt Disney to be like their like Methodist face. They were all from like Poland and Russia and Ukraine, and they were, like they didn't come over here with lots of wealth, but were able to, kind of like muscle their way into the system. I think even, I forget which book talked about it in Hollywood about, it was like Charlie Bluehorn, I think was his name, and people like Sidney Korchak who were working in Hollywood were like the hard Jews. And those guys were more often like came from Eastern European backgrounds and came over later. That they're like maybe first or second generation, as opposed to the slightly more bougie and like waspified like German Jews. But actually to that, Russo writes just about Chicago that the first Jew of the German sect had arrived in Chicago in 1838. A merchant named J. Gottlieb settled there briefly, then prophetically moved on to California in search of gold, unwittingly initiating a paradigm for Korchak and company. Before the immigration surge of the 1880s, the total Jewish population in Chicago was 10,000 out of 500,000. By 1920, that number had swelled to over 225,000, and by 1950, Chicago would have the second largest Jewish count in America, numbering some 350,000. The newest Americans quickly learned that German Jews like J. Gottlieb had arrived in Chicago at a more opportune time. On first arrival, the Russian Jews were met with a prejudice emanating, surprisingly, from their own religious kin, the origins of which were in internecine rivalries between Eastern and Western European Jews, and exacerbated by competition between new arrivals and settled, assimilated German Jews. These competing cliques even had their own discrete cemeteries. Perhaps worst of all, I'd never heard this before, the Russian Jews were perceived as being unrelated to the original 12 tribes of the Torah. Oh, so like they're the Khazars, basically?
Yeah,
like,
wow,
Khazarism. Jews are like getting down with Khazar theory? Wow, okay. So the attitude of both the German Jews and the Spanish Sephardic Jews toward the Russian and Polish Jews was one of superiority and pity. German Jews thought themselves more intellectual and aristocratic. Many were professional businessmen, while the more orthodox, Yiddish-speaking, nomadic Russians were seen as only good enough to employ in the German sweatshops. German Jews, hinting at their own Jewish self-hatred, regarded the Russians as inferior and illiterate, referring to them as schnorrers, beggars, or bums. He quotes something, the autobiography of an immigrant, written by an anonymous Ashkenazi, which paints a dour picture. Quote, when I first put my feet on the soil of Chicago, I was so disgusted that I wished I had stayed at home in Russia. I left the old country because you couldn't be a Jew over there and still live. But I would rather be dead than be the kind of German Jew that brings the Jewish name into disgrace by being a goy. That's what hurts.
God.
They parade around as Jews, and deep down in their hearts, they are worse than goyim. So yeah, they're getting waspified, etc. The Germans' upper hand was temporary as they became outnumbered within a brief but tumultuous 10 years by the Eastern European Jews, basically 50,000 to 20,000, a change that forever altered the character of the Chicago Jewish community. On a macro level, Chicago's population grew from 4,000 in 1840 to 1.7 million in 1900. Invariably, the wanderers found Maxwell Street on the west side of the city. So I guess this was the original kind of ghetto that had only been minimally refurbished after the Great Chicago Fire of 1871. It had a 90% Jewish population. I guess it was like a real like Wild West. It was known as Bloody Maxwell. In 1906, the Chicago Tribune described the street, quote, murderers, robbers, and thieves of the worst kind are here born, reared and grow to maturity in numbers that far exceed the record of any similar district anywhere on the face of the globe. reveling in the freedom which comes from inadequate police control, inspired by the traditions of the criminals that have gone before in the district, living in many instances more like beasts than any human beings. Hundreds and thousands of boys and men follow day after day, year after year, in the bloody ways of crime. From Maxwell come some of the worst murderers, if not actually the worst, that Chicago has ever seen. From Maxwell come the smoothest of robbers, burglars, and thieves of all kinds. From Maxwell come the worst, tough gangs. In general, it may be safely said that no police district in the world turns out such skilled and successful criminals. That sounds like a Fox News rant about Chicago. It's a war zone. Ain't nothing new. It's been a war zone. But then, a lot of the immigrants, there was, I guess, improvement around the turn of the century. And a lot of people moved to a different part of Chicago called Lawndale. And he says, as Chicago's Russian Jews started to prosper at the turn of the century, they began moving out of the rundown Maxwell Street area, following Roosevelt Road towards Ashland Street, then leapfrogging over the Damon Avenue rail yards, finally ending up 4 miles from the Lake Michigan shoreline in a community called Lawndale. It's only 2 miles away, but, it was a little bit nicer. It was a very densely populated, and so the population by 1930 was about 45% Russian Jewish, with also some Polish and Irish people living there. That's actually where Sears Roebuck world headquarters was. And I think actually the founder of Sears Roebuck grew up in Lawndale, one of the many prominent people. And he basically says, eventually by the early 40s, as the Jewish population of Chicago was approaching about 9%, about 110,000 of the 300,000 Jews in the city were living in the greater Lawndale area, the largest and most developed Jewish community that ever existed in Chicago. And he also says that, around this time, beneath the Orthodox surface, subtle changes were mutating the culture of the Ashkenazim. They adopted an uncommon, for Jews, desire to assimilate, perhaps because they came to the collective conclusion that it was the only way to prosper in America. They started to affect German ways, so much so that this area of second settlement was often referred to as Deutschland, becoming increasingly less orthodox or kosher. Lawndale Jews, as they were called, became lax about synagogue and began to frequent the near north and the Loop for entertainment. The rabbi had been the most important person in their lives in the Pale and on Maxwell Street, but now, increasingly, the most important person was the precinct captain, who lorded over the vital patronage job allocations. The Jews even started producing athletes. Sidney Korshak was a school basketball and boxing star. But above all, they worked and studied tirelessly in an effort to ascend the social and economic ladder. In the words of Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Wendell Rawls, the Jews were called names, but they were smarter than the others. They knew math and percentages. They were the Asians of their day.
So, God.
Okay. Oh,
Thank
God.
you.
Yeah, but this is interesting, actually. Since Jews were not allowed to rent, they bought Lawndale block by block, and they were thrilled to be able for the first time to do so. Their focus on acquiring real estate bordered on the obsessive and would play a major role in the success of the supermob. The intense drive for improvement created a potent primordial soup that saw an extraordinary number of Maxwell St. Lawndale youths achieve greatness. There were entertainers such as Benny Goodman, actress Wallace Beery. Hey, get this, Tom Mix, one of the original Laurel Canyon residents, right? I didn't know he was Jewish, actually. Gloria Swanson, President Kennedy's Secretary of Labor Arthur Goldberg, World War II military hero Admiral Hyman George Rickover, champion lightweight boxer Barney Ross, corporate moguls William S. Paley, the founder of CBS, and Barney Balaban, founder of Paramount Pictures, Harry Hart of Hart, Schaffner, and Marx Men's Clothing, Julius Rosenwald, founder of Sears Roebuck, Charles Lubin of the Kitchens of Sara Lee, the Goldblatt brothers, founders of the 50-store chain of Goldblatt's department stores, the Benzinger family of Brunswick Bowling, Abe Pritzker, founder of Hyatt Hotels, and the massive conglomerate the Marmon Group, Henry Crown of General Dynamics and an owner of the Empire State Building, writer L. Frank Baum of The Wizard of Oz, and even the occasional infamous ne'er-do-well like Lee Harvey Oswald's killer, Jack Ruby, and a key member of Al Capone's brain trust, Jake Guzik. So yeah, that's, not a bad roster of famous people, basically.
Definitely not.
Yeah, he talks about how I think David Korshak, who was a saloon keeper and real estate investor, and I think maybe the father of Sidney, actually started his career becoming part of an arson for hire ring and was the first Korshak to be exposed in the New York Times. So one of David's partners was an insurance adjuster named Joseph Fish, whose wife was heiress to the Brunswick bowling ball and billiards empire, that an old-line German Jew would have engaged in an arson conspiracy with an immigrant Russian Ashkenazi contradicted the conventional wisdom, but for a time the partnership flourished. David, who was dubbed King of the Firebugs by the Chicago Daily Journal, even hooked up with an Italian for the schemes. With Fish's insurance ken and Korshak's talent with kerosene, the arson trust set up operations in Chicago, New York, and other large cities, defrauding numerous insurance companies out of tens of thousands of dollars. Wow. So then he eventually did get arrested. Actually, kind of like critical support for robbing insurance companies, like a little bit. But anyways, I mean, that's the type of work. Yes, that was his father, by the way. Moving on, though, that's just kind of like the background about this neighborhood where what Russo calls the supermob, which, he says is basically, that's kind of his term. Block had the serious crime community. This guy calls it the Supermob, but it's basically the same network of like Lansky and all of these straight world associates that mostly came out of Chicago and would eventually get involved with like the Castle Bank and all of this other kind of shit. Also sometimes jokingly called the Kosher Nostra, but he doesn't use that very often. But yeah, this is the syndicate or the Chicago outfit, as it were. And they had names like Korshak, Arvey, Greenberg, Pritzker, and Zifrin. Yeah, Jake Arvey is a guy who pops up a lot in this book, who is a Chicago ward boss who I guess mentored Sidney Korshak and like Ace Greenberg, and also a lawyer named Paul Zifrin, who did a lot of shady, stealthy business transactions with a lot of the people that we've already talked about. But I'm just going to start my little Control F adventure here because he just mentions things in passing. I mean, again, we'll probably circle back on this like more, but let's just go through real quick because we get a little bit of background on, how the Pritzkers came up. Now, they're also an Eastern European Jewish family. I think they came over from Ukraine. Nicholas Pritzker, the Jewish immigrant from Kiev, came over in the 1880s, a poor, penniless immigrant, basically. And he says, in 1902, Nicholas founded the Pritzker and Pritzker law firm, which later added Stanford Clinton to the partnership. So there you go, partnering with like a wasp. Clinton later became the general counsel to the mob-controlled Teamsters Pension Fund and also represented Capone gang members like Al Hart's partner Joe Fusco. Years later, when Fusco moved to Palm Springs, he was seen hosting the likes of son Abe Pritzker, as well as mob bosses Tony Accardo, Frank Costello, Rocco Fischetti, Jake Guzik, and Phil Castell. The Pritzkers firm also... So actually, they started out as lawyers, which is interesting, and then became like huge business people with this the Pritzker and Clinton law firm. So the Pritzkers firm also represented Jake Guzik, and the family were friends of the Korshak clan. The FBI made note of the friendship of Korshak and Pritzker. Patriarch Nicholas Pritzker was on the board of the department store chain owned by the Goldblatt brothers, also good friends and clients of Korshak's. I guess Abe said, I met Korshak when he was attorney for Goldblatt's department store. You know something? I like him. Then contradictorily, he's done favors, but I'd never used him because I'm afraid of his reputation. Most insiders are convinced that Pritzker's statement is disingenuous at best, and one longtime attorney friend of Korshak's and Pritzker's knew it for a fact. Not long after his own passing at the bar, one young Chicago lawyer, who stayed a lifelong friend of both men, went to Abe Pritzker to try to secure his business for his fledgling practice. The attorney, who wished to remain anonymous, has a vivid memory of the encounter. When I went to Abe Pritzker to try to get his account for my new law practice, he said he didn't need me. We hire the best attorney in America, he said, Sidney Korshak. As will be seen, Korshak himself later told the Securities and Exchange Commission of his work for the Pritzkers, and Melville Marks also told the SEC that he believed Korshak was the Pritzkers' labor lawyer in Chicago. Marks' statement begs the question, why would a law firm require a labor lawyer? The answer is that the successful legal practice was but the tip of the iceberg of a vast Pritzker commercial and real estate empire that would come to be worth billions, much of which would be hidden in offshore bank accounts to avoid paying taxes. Their varied interests included the Marmon Group, which oversaw dozens of corporations with diversified holdings in basic industries, natural resources, and real estate. The Pritzkers also came to own the Hyatt hotel chain with its 100-plus international hotels. The New York Times noted, Pritzker holdings are too numerous for any one member of the family to recall at any given moment. And he quotes, I think quite appropriately here, Honoré de Balzac, "Behind every great fortune, there is a crime." Ain't that true?
True.
So going on, what is most relevant to the Pritzker role in the supermob is the large number of Pritzker transactions that involve known crime figures, supermob partners such as fellow 134 tenants Paul Ziffrin and Sidney Korshak, as well as other notables including David Bazelon, Alex Greenberg, Murray Humphreys, and Teamster boss Jimmy Hoffa. Allegations of Pritzker mob links have dogged the family from the earliest times. Jack Clark, a renowned Chicago private investigator, recently recalled what he heard on the streets. Frontier Finance was used and owned by the Pritzkers as a holding company and is believed to be the secret to the origins of the family's involvement with criminals. Pritzker lent to immigrants 5 for 7, or $5 lent against $7 repayment with interest. It was started on the west side, and the Pritzkers let the mob run it for him. This company office was where the mob held their meetings. Frontier Finance was a state-licensed loan company with a number of legit investors, such as the Postmaster of Chicago, a former chairman of the Cook County Republican Party, and a retired Chicago police captain. But curiously, the president of the firm was Frank Buccieri, brother of the notorious Fiore Fifi Buccieri, one of the outfit's top gambling bosses, and a dreaded, quote, juice collector. Cool. Stronger evidence was surfacing on the West Coast, where the LAPD observed Abe Pritzker meeting with Louis Dragna, brother of LA's Capone, Jack Dragna, in the LA office of attorney Louis Hiller, a Korshak associate. Louis Dragna was a made mafioso who later ran the LA family with Jimmy the Weasel Fradiano. The LAPD developed information that Pritzker and Hiller were fronting for, quote, gangland money. The supposed purpose of the meeting was to bring the Dragnas, who had $1 million to invest, together with the Pritzkers. In the late 40s, the Pritzkers, like most other savvy Chicago hoteliers, joined the new Chicago Hotel Association, a powerful group of approximately 30 owners that was somehow immune to strikes, but the equally powerful Hotel and Restaurant Employees Union, a guild whose leaders were handpicked by the Chicago outfit and whose reach would soon extend to the West Coast. Not surprisingly, the labor negotiator for the HRE was Sidney Korshak, who later told investigators he was recommended for the job by Henry Crown's vice president, Patrick Hoy. I mean, more on the Crown family a little bit later, but they ended up owning a little company called General Dynamics, which manufactures drones for the U.S. military. And they basically go back, their relationship with the Pritzkers basically goes back to like the 1930s and 1940s. Like they are very, very tight. And I guess this is bizarre. I don't know what this means. Sidney Korshak was meanwhile gaining experience in the labor counseling game, Chicago style, while helping a man who had become one of his alleged Seneca, quote, sex party pals, department store owner Joel Goldblatt. Over the years, the friendship deepened with the Korshaks and Goldblatts traveling to Europe together several times. Joel's widow, MJ Goldblatt, recently recalled, anti-Semitism was a motivating factor in the drive of both Joel and Sidney. Joel treated Sidney like a god. When Sidney came into the office, you'd think the Pope was coming. Joel would disconnect the phones, close the doors, and order kosher hot dogs or corned beef. So I don't know what that, I'd have to look elsewhere to see what the alleged Seneca sex parties were all about. But once again, we're in this weird territory of maybe some blackmail, weird shit going on. So Korshak would, in league with all these people, actually Cy Hirsch reported this, that Korshak would fix unions.
Wow, Cy Hirsch naturally
yeah, all the size. Yeah, I know, right? Yeah. So yeah, they basically were kind of like, they would fix the unions. So they could either get the unions to strike, and then they'd go to the management and be like, look, I can take care of it. And then he'd get paid a lot of money to tell the union to stop. Or he could prevent unions from striking if he wanted to. Korshak also had a close relationship with established banker Walter Hyman, then a vice president of the First National Bank of Chicago, and Joel Goldblatt's personal banker. So again, I think we talked about First National Bank of Chicago. Okay, just moving on here. So you can see this milieu of kind of gangsters. And also, okay, this is another really interesting connection, talking a little bit about Hollywood at the time and how this group starts to get involved. I guess lots of payoffs to Nixon back and forth, even when he was a young congressperson to like protect the gambling rackets. He says the mob entered into a symbiotic relationship with Hollywood. The mob wanted the executives hot money and broads, and the Hollywood elite wanted the swagger they thought would rub off by association with hoods, in addition to the muscle they could bring to bear in the nascent labor movement.
Cool.
Much has been written about Frank Sinatra and Sam Giancana, George Raft and Bugsy Siegel, and Johnny Rosselli and moguls like Harry Cohn, who proudly wore the ruby pinky ring given to him by Rosselli, and proudly kept a framed picture of his idol, Benito Mussolini, on his desk. Wow, okay.
Very awesome.
Harry Cohn, okay. I guess he's Jewish, but he loves Mussolini? Okay. But there was more. Joe Schenk's earliest investors included New York underworld genius Arnold Rothstein. Long E. Zwillman provided Harry Cohn with startup money to take over Columbia, and Louis Mayer's closest friend was said to be a hood, Frank Orsatti. One employed the other, and in return, mobsters were favorably portrayed on screen. So there we go once again, like, why do you think art, like, represent, like, art is just art. It doesn't represent, like, the social forces in our society. Like, we're, like, basically people in the 30s and 40s, like, getting, I guess before the Hays Code, were, like, getting psyoped into, like, loving gangsters, like, still goes on today.
Yes.
So this is interesting. Sam and Chuck.
Yeah, and as you said, it's kind of like a factor in the Pritzker fever almost. Like you said, he was like a Sopranos character.
Yeah. And now as we see, like, he really is a Sopranos character, like not just in appearance, but like in substance. He is literally like, this is a mob family essentially that is like kind of pretends to be straight. But this is interesting too on that tip. Sam and Chuck Giancana alleged the mob sponsored numerous stars, including the Marx Brothers, Marilyn Monroe, Clark Gable, Gary Cooper, Jean Harlow, Cary Grant, and Wendy Berry. Jimmy Fratiano and Mickey Cohen both claimed that they knew half the movie people on a first-name basis. Robert Mitchum and Sammy Davis Jr. acted as character witnesses for Cohen during his numerous trials. Proud member of the Church of Satan, Sammy Davis Jr. The Hoods bedded an endless parade of young actresses such as Jean Harlow, who enjoyed the affections of Long E. Zwillman, and Lana Turner, who lived with Cohen's boy, Johnny Stompanato. Interesting. Actually, Raymond Chandler noticed this, who, after a herd of moguls, seeing a herd of moguls returning from lunch, wrote, "They looked so exactly like a bunch of top-flight Chicago gangsters moving in to read the death sentence on the beaten competitor. It brought home to me in a flash the strange psychological and spiritual kinship between the operations of big money business and the rackets. Same faces, same expressions, same manners, same way of dressing, the same exaggerated leisure of movement." Insightful comment there, I gotta say. So yeah, it talks about like drug use was widespread, including cocaine, heroin, and illegal alcohol. Sexual favors were demanded by casting directors and became a sort of alternative currency. When actresses such as Joan Crawford were blackmailed with porno reels shot in their youth, Rosselli and friends put the hammer to the extortionists, etc., etc. But here's where it gets interesting, and I didn't know a lot about this, but behind the scenes, a subtle criminal incursion was beginning. When into this dynamic mix of prospering Jews and mobster chic was added the post-World War II supermob arrivals. Indeed, the Jewish population of Los Angeles exploded following the war, doubling by 1948 and again by 1960. Jewish newcomers were so predominant that by 1950, only 8% of adult Jews in LA had been born there. But without doubt, the most important of the new arrivals hailed from Chicago, and they had names like Korshak, Zifrin, Hart, Factor, Stein, Wasserman, Evans, Pritzker, Annenberg, and a non-Jew named Reagan.
Oh.
Yep, he's part of this whole gang. These men represented a new kind of LA mogul, one that had ready access to the clout and lucre of the Chicago underworld. In no time, the new arrivals seized not only the entertainment juggernaut, but also the political clout that accompanied real estate investment on a massive scale. So yeah, and actually, I think it's not totally coincidental that the first Pritzker Hyatt property that they buy is the International Airport in Los Angeles in the late 50s. So, but they were involved in a lot more than that. And they were often silent partners in various deals. This book talks a lot about this lawyer named Paul Zifrin, who was close with this very sus guy named David Bazelon, both from Chicago. But Paul Zifrin, actually, his college tuition was financed by the Pritzker Foundation, which was already, I guess, around in like the 1930s and 40s. So they've been in this like philanthropy game for a long time. And so obviously he ended up kind of like serving Pritzker interests, and also once again with this like illegitimate child shit. This guy Paul Zifrin was rumored to be the illegitimate child of that sus political ward boss, Colonel Jack Arvey, who was like in with all these people. So once again, you get with like same with like Al Malnick and like Brett Ratner. You get like this guy who's kind of raised up. He's given a Pritzker Foundation scholarship to pay for law school. And then he's brought into this whole gang and all this shit. So they start moving in on California. But actually, I think the biggest example of this is like a perfect fucking Gustavus Myers example of like what the Pritzkers are all about. And like the true, it's very much like the JP Morgan selling like fake rifles to the Union Army during during the Civil War, and everyone blowing their thumbs off and like him getting away with it.
Yes.
Turns out this Supermob Chicago network did kind of something very similar in terms of not direct war profiteering. They get into that later, but in the mass expropriation of the Japanese-American population, primarily of California, during World War II. So I just want to read a little bit from this part here in the book because it's actually quite shocking. I actually learned about the Japanese internment in school. Like I think in California, that's something that they do teach, you know, and I think we read
learned about it.
Oh yeah, like Return to Manzanar and stuff like that.
I didn't read that, but yeah, we definitely learned about it. We did a whole unit on Japan, and that was part of it in elementary school.
Yeah, we went on a field trip to like a museum in San Francisco that commemorates it, and it always was. It is this weird thing. I mean, talk about the FDR of our generation.
Yeah,
right?
I was just gonna say that. Yeah, it's a huge blight on FDR. These people just really want to have like a big boy to just like admire and love, but there's a huge black stain on even FDR. I think Pritzker probably would not be even as good as FDR, but you can't really talk about him in isolation of that.
Well, he might be similar to FDR in one respect. In the respect of, let's see, actually, I wouldn't even say FDR profited personally off of Japanese internment, but you know who did? The Pritzker family and all their associates. Yeah. So get this. This is in a section called The Rape of the Nissei, which was the sort of colloquial term for Japanese Americans in California. He writes, the December 7th, 1941 attack on Pearl Harbor by the Japanese provided an inadvertent boost for the fortunes of the supermob. The payoff was not immediate, taking 3.5 years to transpire, but it was profound, a direct result of profiteering from the misery of thousands of wrongfully detained Americans. Imagine the tragic effect had the United States confined every American-born and foreign-born Muslim to a 3.5-year imprisonment after the September 11th attacks on the country. Add to that horror the impact on these innocents had all their property, which had been earned over 2 generations, been seized and auctioned off for pennies on the dollar, much of it going to buyers with inside information about the choicest parcels. In 1942, this is exactly what happened to the Nissei, or Japanese Americans, and the supermob was the insider. Ironically, the process by which this largely Jewish cadre acquired Japanese property bore a resemblance to the Aryanization of Jewish property in Nazi Germany. The first Japanese arrived in 1869 in the U.S., establishing the Wakamatsu colony in Gold Hills, California. Although initially welcomed as a form of cheaper labor than the irascible Chinese, they soon became pariahs when, through backbreaking hard work, they saved enough to purchase land, mostly in the form of farms, small hotels, and other commercial real estate, and what they couldn't buy, they leased for farming. So they soon became a major economic force in the state. Let's see, in 1940, there were 535,000 acres of Nissei farms situated on the state's most fertile property and were worth $72 million plus $6 million in equipment. California's 94,000 Japanese raised 41% of the state's staple truck crops, such as celery, carrots, onions, lettuce, and tomatoes. Other commercial real estate in downtown areas was valued in the millions, but would be worth much more in the near future, as the city populations were unknowingly on the verge of a post-war explosion. The success of the Japanese in California brought out so much latent racism and xenophobia among the whites that in 1913, California passed the Alien Land Law, which prevented non-citizens from buying any more land. The impressive ascendancy of the Nissei came to a screeching halt almost immediately after Pearl Harbor. Within 2 hours, police were arresting everyone who looked Japanese in the LA district known as Little Tokyo. The next day, the U.S. Treasury froze Japanese bank accounts and seized all Japanese-owned banks and businesses. 2 days after the attack, Japanese-language schools were closed, but the U.S. citizenry called for much more. Fueled by reports of, quote, magic cables, intercepts of communications among Japanese diplomats that allegedly discussed the recruitment of Nissei spies, the American paranoia, especially in California, reached a fever pitch. Columnist Westbrook Pegler led the outcry in the national press, writing...
Westbrook Pegler, you say.
Right?
Okay.
What did you have to say, Westbrook? He said, the Japanese in California should be under armed guard to the last man and woman right now, and to hell with habeas corpus. Syndicated Hearst sports writer Henry McLemore wrote of the Japanese Americans, herd them up, pack them off, and give them the inside room in the Badlands. Let them be pinched, hurt, angry, and dead up against it. Personally, I hate the Japanese, and that goes for all of them. Okay,
right.
And not to be outdone, California's Attorney General and future Governor and Supreme Court Chief Justice Earl Warren voiced the hysteria for Californian politicians in congressional testimony. I quote, "There is more potential danger among the group of Japanese who are born in this country than from the alien Japanese who are born in Japan. We believe that when we are dealing with the Caucasian race, we have methods that will test the loyalty of them, and we believe that we can, in dealing with the Germans and the Italians, arrive at some fairly sound conclusions because our knowledge of the way they live in the community and have lived for many years. But when we deal with the Japanese, we are in an entirely different field, and we cannot form any opinion that we believe to be sound. I believe, sir, that in time of war, every citizen must give up some of his normal rights." So, like, we can't understand the Japanese at all. So, like, just we had to play it safe and throw them in there. So, yeah, then, you know, obviously FDR signed Executive Order 9066 in February 1942, which gave to the Secretary of War the power to exclude any persons from designated areas in order to secure national defense objectives against sabotage and espionage. More specifically, the order mandated the detaining of all persons believed to be a possible danger, especially the West Coast Nissei. Now, this is interesting. I'd like to learn more about this one day, but he says, over the objections of FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover, whose bureau was tasked with arresting religious and community leaders, all 120,000 West Coast Japanese were placed in temporary facilities and given less than 2 weeks to make arrangements for the sale of their property before being transported to concentration camps in the desert Southwest, where they would spend the next 3.5 years. The incarcerations initiated a lifelong and historically significant behind-the-scenes feud between Hoover and Earl Warren. Interestingly, during his tenure as Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, one of Warren's favored law clerks was Ken Zifrin, the son of Paul Zifrin. Again, the guy who was like all up in this. Now that's interesting. I don't know why J. Edgar Hoover was apparently against Japanese internment, it sounds like.
Maybe he just didn't like it because Earl Warren did.
I'm not sure because,
maybe
you know, Earl Warren...
He thought it was inconvenient. I don't know.
Well, Warren was a 33rd degree Freemason. He was the highest ranking Freemason in California at a certain point. Obviously, he ended up serving on the Warren Commission, which, you know, I think he even mentions here in a footnote that there were like certain digs in the Warren Commission that, like, if the FBI had been more proactive, like, this could have been stopped. And it was meant to be like Earl Warren being like, fuck you, J. Edgar Hoover, and stuff. I don't know, Alien versus Predator right there. Like, I don't know who I trust less. Or maybe he thought that it was like a stupid policy or something to like round up literally everybody. He'd rather just like spy on everybody and like be more selective. I'm not really sure. But, you know, the bottom line of this is that, you know, they all got sent to these relocation centers and all their property either had to be abandoned or sold in like a fire sale for pennies on the dollar. You know, and then of course the conditions like sucked out in the desert. It was not great at all. But he says, you know, as if the Nissei collective memory needed more trauma, there was one last insult to weather. When they emerged from their concentration camps over 40 months later, all of their possessions were gone. The issue of the Nisei's abandoned property was dealt with in the same harsh manner as the prisoners themselves. Suddenly, without employment, they could not afford mortgage payments or indefinite storage of their possessions, given mere days to sell their homes, businesses, and all the belongings they could not carry. Their plight defined a buyer's market. So, like, victims told Congress about some of their losses. So, so one of them bought like a new truck. They sold their entire strawberry farming operation for $2,000, and the purchaser like resold it for more than $10,000. Like all kinds of, like farms, businesses, houses, everything. And they also they were forced to sell, give away, or euthanize family pets as well. Very cool.
Wow.
But he says, for speculators with deep pockets, the real bargains were in houses, undeveloped Nisei land, and commercial property such as stores, warehouses, and hotels. Basically, they had the option of either turning their business over to the creditors at great loss or abandon it entirely. Yeah, they liquidated all of the stuff. And this is a disturbing comment right here. Yeah, a representative of a grower association in Salinas said, "We're charged with wanting to get rid of the Japs for selfish reasons. We might as well be honest. We do. It's a question of whether the white man lives on the Pacific coast or the brown man."
Oh, jeez.
What gives credence to the allegation of a hidden Anglo agenda to take over the Japanese land
Not
is
very
the obvious
well hidden.
Is the obvious and damning fact the U.S. did not inter Germans and Italians, with whose homelands we were also at war. And of course, they were barely compensated once they did get out in 1945. That the Federal Reserve estimated the direct property seizures from the Nisei were worth $400 million in 1942 dollars, approximately $2.7 billion today, and estimated their profit losses at about like $2 billion. And they say that for the most part, the war all but wiped out Japanese-owned business in California, long the goal of many Anglos. Yeah, this is something that they basically had wanted for many, many years. The sort of like white people in California, they'd been thirsting for this, and they finally got their chance. Now, the last part of it is like, who bought all of this land? So, despite their best efforts, the Japanese could only sell a fraction of their holdings in the brief time allotted. Thus, in 1942, FDR signed Executive Order 9095, establishing the Office of Alien Property, which is under the Department of Justice, which spent the next few years seizing, inventorying, and finding buyers for millions of dollars worth of property, taken not only from the Japanese, but also from German nationals. Even more disturbing, many of the seized properties were sold via no-contest sealed bids overseen by a key appointee of President Harry Truman. And so the Office of Alien Property, that's basically where it gets juicy. So the punchline here, who is this like close appointee that got put in charge of the Office of Alien Property? Well, in 1947, Assistant Attorney General David Bazelon, who had been a top Democratic Party fundraiser in the 1944 elections, was promoted to custodian of alien property, prompting him to declare, "I am probably, in a sense, one of the largest businessmen in the country. On top of that, I'm my own lawyer." Once installed, Bazelon hired who else? Abe Pritzker's son, J.A. Pritzker, who became the special assistant to the director in the Alien Property Office. Jay was, like Paul Zifrin, a former classmate of Bazelon's at Northwestern. It was now clear why Abe Pritzker had been, quote, grateful to Bazelon and therefore gave him his Franklin stock. That was another deal they did. Jay's acceptance of the new post raised eyebrows since the wealthy Pritzker heir was lowly paid and resided in the pricey Willard Hotel for the duration of his one-year employment. Speculation arose that since Jay's bill at the Willard dwarfed his meager paycheck, there must have been some other purpose for his taking the position. That contention was buttressed when, according to congressional investigators, Jay utilized his new insider information to purchase stock in a knitting machine manufacturing company that had been seized by the Alien Office. Get this, his $73,000 investment was said to be worth $1 million. So personally enriching himself. Bazelon's assessment of his new clout was not an understatement. The OAP confiscated 415 businesses with a total valuation of $290 million in tangible assets alone and over 6,000 German patents, worth exponentially more than the businesses that would be given to U.S. business. That's interesting, too. All these corporations stole German patents. But one congressman spoke of the businesses and capital under control of the OAP, saying, They are the biggest plums in the entire Truman administration. Journalist Robert Goh wrote, the alien custodian could use his discretion as to whether properties were put out for sealed bid or negotiated. It is clear that there is much room for preferential treatment by the custodian. Preferential treatment is exactly what happened, and not surprisingly, among the earliest recipients were Paul Ziffrin and other connected Chicagoans. When the FBI searched the alien property custodian office files 5 years later, it found letters showing that Ziffrin and Bazelon had been interested in obtaining 4 commercial buildings in LA from the OAP at least as early as 1946. They ended up buying, I think, a warehouse in downtown Los Angeles. Obviously, Pritzker's got like his son right up in there. Then, not to be outdone, the Crown family, Jake Arby's great friend Colonel Henry Crown, right after Bazelon assumed the post, bought a 26,000-acre abandoned coal mine in Farmersville, California, from the OAP for $150,000. And, of course, the coal alone on the property was valued in the tens of millions of dollars. So the General Dynamics Crown family also profited massively off it. I guess then this got so blatant because then all these Chicago guys started just like buying up all this land, alien land in the Skid Row area of Los Angeles, Whittier, Santa Ana, Pasadena, Southgate, Bakersfield, Fresno, and Stockton, 3,500 acres north of Long Beach. But then the Senate basically started investigating it for being an insider gravy train. So the Chicago Tribune wrote in 1948, summarizing the allegations, at least a score of former New Dealers, close friends of the administration, and former federal employees have been put on the payrolls of the firms the United States operates or placed in strategic positions as directors. Some of them draw as much as $50,000 a year. In half a dozen multi-million-dollar corporations, former government workers and their political pals are in on the ground floor in anticipation of the time these firms are sold to private management. Some concerns, such as the $80 million General Aniline Film Corporation, are suffering from undercover jockeying of powerful political and financial groups which hope to get these lush properties when Uncle Sam puts them on the auction block. The Alien Property Investigation will inquire and reports that law firms and lawyers with right connections have found a, quote, paradise in rich fees and costly litigation involving seized properties. And, Russo says that's like not even close to like the worst of it, basically. So they went on just like an absolute buying spree that was, like the definition of like illegal bullshit. And that just gives you a good taste of like who they were running with. Okay, very last thing. Then we'll go to break, and then maybe we'll move from there back to Castle Bank. But I found this wild fucking connection last night, which is how I found this book, Supermob. It concerns something that we talked about in one of our recent Q&As. I think somebody asked us about the true fatherhood or the true parentage of Zena LeVay's child.
Very interesting. Okay, yeah.
This is very interesting. So I had to go back because I'd almost forgotten about it. And there was a connection that I threw out there in that was murky, but I thought it was an interesting story relating to Anton Lavey and the Church of Satan. So what I found, because I was looking for sus lords that were associated with Lavey and the church, and I found some stories about this hotel and real estate tycoon in San Francisco named Donald Werby. And Donald Werby was cited in a few articles as having been really good friends with Anton Lavey and was actually he and his wife, Willie, who is actually the daughter of the founder of the Chock-full of Nuts coffee fortune. Another thing I didn't realize. But so a family that not only was Werby, a very successful San Francisco real estate guy, his wife was an heiress to like the Chock-full of Nuts fortune. And so, they probably ran in some pretty high circles, but they were a member of Anton Lavey's like magic circle group, I think either in the late 50s or early 60s. And it was mentioning it in the context of Kenneth Anger knowing all these people as well. And this is like probably in the few years before the Church of Satan was sort of founded in, I think, October 1966. And we just thought, that was interesting, because then I found out something else about Donald Werby. I found a pretty horrifying set of stories from the early 90s where Donald Werby was arrested for having sex with underage prostitutes who I think may have been as young as 13 or 14, but were definitely no older than 16. He may have even gotten caught twice doing this and also smoking crack cocaine with them. It sounded like he was maybe like he was either in his hotels or he was going down to the Tenderloin and like finding under, it's honestly, it's very murky. But I mean, this is really like some Epstein kind of Larry King, like mixed with like Hunter Biden shit. This is a guy who was already like middle-aged. And the other thing that I think maybe it was an SF Weekly article that they alluded to is that he was a like funder of the Church of Satan for a certain number of years. Like he had been giving money to Anton Lavey to keep the Church of Satan thing going. And then in the 90s, he gets caught smoking crack and having sex with like 13-year-old girls, which kind of does destroy his reputation because he was also very involved in San Francisco politics and like fundraising and giving out money to people. Very connected guy. And then I think he died in like 2002. But then I found a blog that was citing this book that pointed out, and I remember reading this when we were like digging into Werby, that he had a Hyatt connection. I was like, yeah, what was it with, because he was involved in hotel development. Of course, the San Francisco Embarcadero Hyatt was like a huge project in the 70s that the Pritzkers were totally involved in. And then I find that in this book, Supermob, there is a single mention of real estate tycoon Donald Werby. But here's what, I'll just read this kind of like out of context because it kind of blew my mind. Okay. He wrote that Basilon, quote, shows up in San Francisco in a shady manner as aligned with a Los Angeles lawyer, Zifrin, in owning or being equal counsel for hotels in Stockton, Modesto, San Francisco, Fresno, Bakersfield, etc., which were formerly handled by the Office of Alien Property after being taken over from Japanese and others. Note, Basilon's benefactor, Abe Pritzker, was also heavily invested in San Francisco. According to a former Department of Justice strike force officer, Pritzker worked in partnership there with hotel and real estate tycoon Donald Werby, who the source believed was dispatched westward from Chicago by none other than Al Capone. Damn, right? What the fuck? Okay. So this guy is not just like a sus real estate guy. He's doing deals with Abe Pritzker and Hyatt. He is hanging out with Anton Lavey, maybe giving money to like the Church of Satan and like might be a Satanist, perhaps. And he's also sent out from Chicago to San Francisco by Al Capone. I don't know how late that would have been because I feel like Capone died around this time, or he was like syphilitic and insane. But nonetheless, you could assume that means the broader Chicago outfit sent him out to San Francisco, where he was doing all kinds of things, and they were all managing they were all involved in running these properties which had been stolen from the Japanese, and then they were able to like scam the government into giving them for rock bottom prices. This is in a way kind of how this Chicago gang really buys their way into the capitalist game out west in a big way. And on top of that, just to like follow up on the sort of allegations about like Donald Werby, who also had a brother who spelled his name Werbe, and Donald spelled it Werby, which is just like, if that's not sus, I don't know. Like these guys worked in a real estate business together, but like it's like they're trying to throw off
brothers and they are spelling their names differently. Yeah, like, it's not so the 17th century. Like
I can't believe they're trying to throw off the SEO in like 1955. Like it's fucking crazy. But I did find, and I think it was like the Sympathy for the Devil article that had mentioned Donald Werby and his wife Willie being in the magic circle with Lavey and Kenneth Anger. But then I had to really hunt this down. But I noticed in a Google result that after that article came out in the 90s, Willie Werby, the wife of Donald Werby, like wrote a letter to the editor responding to it. And so I had to go, like, it's been taken down off SF Weekly, but I was able to find an archive version of it. So I'm going to bring it up right now, just so we hear, Sympathy for the Devil. We get to hear what they have to say about their involvement with Anton Lavey. So she wrote in 98, I think she died, by the way, just a couple years ago. This is captioned, "Shake a Leg." Jack Bulware's June 17th cover story, "Has the Church of Satan Gone to Hell?" was so detailed and obviously well-researched that it is a shame that he repeated a fiction from a long-ago book. It is not pleasant to find yourself labeled a Satanist, and by implication, a cannibalistic Satanist to boot. My husband Don and I became friends of Anton Lavey in 1958, years before he, or his PR man, thought up the Church of Satan. At the time, we were involved with Camera Obscura Film Society and shared his interest in movies. We were never involved with the Church of Satan in any way, never joined, never attended a mass or ceremony, and we emphatically did not dine on a human leg. She puts in parentheses, yuck. I never even heard of a magic circle, nor Forrest Ackerman, nor yet a dildo manufacturer. Mr. Bulware, who showed such intelligent skepticism about the famous Lavey background, accepted these details with utter credulity. The book in question, I forget the title, was written by someone named Burton Wolfe, who got all his facts directly from Anton without checking them. Okay, so Anton Lavey is the one who told him like that he was hanging out with these people. She said, this is what a way to end. The closest we came was attending Anton's Halloween parties until a group of guys showed up in Nazi uniforms, which made us uncomfortable, and we ended the practice. Willie Werby, Potrero Hill. Editor's note, by the way, they respond to her. Editor's note, SF Weekly did not intend to imply that Mr. and Mrs. Werby had eaten human flesh. The passage Mrs. Werby notes above was intended only to detail the popular legend the credulous had helped build around the Anton Lavey, as described in books like Burton Wolfe's The Devil's Avenger. SF Weekly regrets any confusion that may have resulted. So, okay, there she goes, on record, just like David Levitt in Utah. Like, I'm going on the record that I'm not a cannibalist. I'm not a cannibal. I'm not a Satanist, blah, blah, blah. But it's just that so fucking, I mean, by this point, her husband's reputation had kind of been completely destroyed by his pedophilic crack smoking scandals and stuff. And I think he got a slap on the wrist for it. He got like probation or something like that for it. But so she's kind of saying, no, like we're not Satanists and stuff. But I don't know. I'd have to go and read that entire book and see, there don't seem to be many mentions of them like after the 1960s. So maybe they did see like Michael Aquino show up at the Halloween party in a Nazi uniform and got sussed out. She also mentions his PR man. I don't know who was Anton. I thought Anton Lavey was his own PR man.
I don't know.
Interesting.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure the Church of Satan was his idea, but I don't know, unless there's some shadowy figure behind the scenes.
Yeah. The other thing that I think I had talked about in the Q&A episode that is just like briefly worth mentioning is there was like a scandal in Hyatt in the late 1970s that I think I read the New York Times articles, Hyatt chain lays misuse of funds to ex-president. This was interesting because this was all about how Hugh M. Friend Jr., the former president of Hyatt, had improperly used for personal purpose about $500,000 in company funds. And this came out of like a filing with the SEC. It says that Mr. Friend allegedly used funds from both Hyatt and a San Francisco real estate developer who has had substantial business dealings with both Mr. Friend and Hyatt. That, of course, is Donald Werby. The questionable transactions revolve around Donald D. Werby, a San Francisco real estate developer who managed for Hyatt a 255-unit luxury apartment in the exclusive Nob Hill section of San Francisco. According to the Hyatt filing, over the last 3 years, Mr. Friend was involved in a partnership with Mr. Werby and also borrowed money from Mr. Werby, some of which originated with the Hyatt Corporation. Mr. Friend had a total indebtedness to Werby-related entities of $330,000 through June of this year. Earlier this year, while the Hyatt president owed money to Mr. Werby, the company sold him a 1/8 interest in the Nob Hill apartments for $1 million. It required only $50,000 in cash and permitted Mr. Werby to pay only the interest charges on the outstanding obligation for 10 years. So like they gave him a pretty like sweetheart deal to buy into this luxury apartment complex. And I think the other thing we found that was like a little sus was that there was like $75,000 in unsubstantiated travel and entertainment expenses. Yeah. And also, and I think the weird thing about that, about Hugh Friend, was his sister, Marion Cindy Friend, married Jay Pritzker. So his family married, like he wasn't just the president of Hyatt, but like his family intermarried into the Pritzkers. Yes. So now I guess all of Jay Pritzker's descendants, including Tom Pritzker, like, and all of his siblings and children and whatever are also friends as well. It's kind of funny.
All very normal.
Yeah, it's an incestuous relationship with your friend who's literally named Friend, like who you marry into your family, and then he runs the company. Oh, the funniest thing about that last thing was that his father, so Hugo M. Friend Jr. was the president of Hyatt, who was engaging in weird fucking shit with Donald Werby. But his father, Hugo M. Friend Sr., was an Illinois judge who presided over the Chicago Black Sox trial of 1920, which maybe some people are familiar with, but that was the trial about like the Black Sox throwing the World Series, and it was all like masterminded by Arnold Rothstein. And there was like a whole thing where the players like purposely lost so that because they were betting on themselves like losing, and then there was a huge scandal in like 1920 that like the biggest game in baseball has been hacked, you know, and stuff. So like his father, the judge, acquitted all of the players and was like beloved for doing that and stuff. And I have to imagine that maybe like Hugo Sr. got like some visits from Arnold Rothstein's people to like cover it up. So like the shit goes fucking deep. Oh, also, okay, last thing, because I went on a Werby dive. Werby built a couple things outside of California, including in the early 2000s, a place called a Grosvenor Resort, which that's his like Grosvenor Properties is like his company. And that was located at Walt Disney World Village in Lake Buena Vista, Florida. And he owned that. I think he actually ran that from 1986 to 2007. And then the company, I think, was bought out by like Wyndham or something, but it's still there today. So he was getting in, I think, as we'll see in our next segment, on some Disney profiteering as well.
Yes.
Also fucking connected, isn't it? So yeah, big boy, whips ass, awesome, totally cool. This is the family that this is like JB Pritzker's grandfather is the person we've been talking about this entire time. By the way, Abe Pritzker is JB's grandfather, the titan of this entire clan.
The original big boy, the patriarch of the big boy dynasty.
You know, maybe since he's feeling like giving out reparations, you know, to people that were incarcerated under the very unjust war on drugs, maybe he should like give some reparations to the Japanese Americans in California. While he's at it, maybe.
No.
Okay. All right.
That's not acceptable.
Yeah. No, he's a pragmatist.
That would
he's
not
a realist.
whip ass. It would not be socialist.
No, exactly.
It would alienate the working class.
Alienate big ag and like the weird hydroponic, weed companies. They're probably using Bill Casey's hydroponic technology to like grow all the
wow,
weed.
that's
to, like,
the ultimate connection.
It's a 30-year conspiracy.
Yeah, that was why he was so into it. I mean, it is interesting that we were talking about in that book, like the weird interest that all these people had in psychedelics that you wouldn't necessarily expect. Like, I mean, we know there's a lot of sus stuff going around with psychedelics like in the 60s and even after, but you wouldn't really think that like this bizarre like CIA world of like financial crime, like funding Contras would intersect with that. Like, but it did.
It absolutely did. It absolutely, with Billy Mellon Hitchcock and everything. And
Brotherhood
and now,
what is it called again? The Brotherhood of Eternal Love?
Yes, the Brotherhood of Eternal Love. And we'll get to it one day, by the way, but this is like an extremely deep cut. I feel like it's the most under-examined aspect of like the whole 60s. But apparently, I remember reading some article by like a baby boomer woman who kind of knew like Augustus Housley Stanley, and apparently he had a female like partner, like sometime girlfriend during his whole acid period, who apparently like was more of the real chemist and like the driving force. And the article is kind of written
100% believable.
The article was kind of written in a way, I can't, it's too much to look it up right now, but it was written in a way of being like, wow, like women's role in history being erased again. But it did mention in the article that this girl too was the scion of like a great industrial fortune, or maybe it was like a Midwestern like agro company, like agribusiness empire or something. I forget her name, but she never gets talked about in any of the 60s shit. And it's like, there you go again. Why are all these like silk topper scions like going rogue and like manufacturing acid, but then like applying their grandfather's like business ethics to like rationalize production? And like, it's just so fucking weird. And I guess with weed today, it's there's an aspect of that,
and there's also like the psychedelic legalization thing is starting to pop off. It seems like the sort of legitimation of that, like we need to do this now, like everyone microdosing, like constant, like it's normal to just like constantly microdose if you're a lawyer.
Yep. And as we see, I mean, when you read about Billy Millen Hitchcock, he's almost the archetype for that, because he's like doing stock deals on the phone, like in the morning, and then like tripping out like in the afternoon, and all this shit, and like that's so de rigueur right now, and
like it's very strange.
It was interesting too that the other thing that I forgot to like note when we were going through his whole thing is that he was also manufacturing STP in Marin County in the early 70s. And I believe the sort of discoverer or creator, the original creator of STP was Sasha Shulgin, who I think had worked for DuPont. He's also been getting, I think maybe his widow just died, but he's been getting a lot. I've seen his name popping up more recently. And, you know, he lived on this kind of like weird drug farm compound in the East Bay, honestly, not that far from where I grew up. And it had this little nest of sussness creating things like 2CB. He kind of repopularized ecstasy in the 80s. There's a whole line of things. He's also was a proud Bohemian Grove member too. And I remember we had come up, maybe when we were talking a little bit of shit about one of the biggest promoters of like psychedelics are just totally based and awesome. Hamilton Morris on Vice.
Oh God, the slander that we heaped upon him.
Come at me, Hamilton stands. Come at me. All right. Because he mentioned in some profile of him that his family, like his father, Errol Morris, the very serious, famous, documentary filmmaker, were like dear family friends of the Shulgins, both Sasha Shulgin and his wife and stuff. So again, it's like, we're not even going that far out in terms of the connections. And then Hamilton Morris gets this like plum kind of position on Vice, like this very plum platform, to basically tell you that like fentanyl is based and harmless, and like
it's no different from any other drug.
You should microdose PCP every day
under controlled conditions. PCP and Advil are 100% the same. It's fine.
Pushing the op for a whole new generation.
Yes.
And I don't even. It's like
to what end? Like, I guess just to make a bunch of money. Is that like, or just to be a fucking sus creep? I guess it's a double-edged thing where on one hand it's just like you can just make money hand over fist on this stuff, obviously, and also it has like a little bit of like Manson vibes where it's like make everyone take psychedelics and then
like bring about a race war or some shit.
Manipulated.
No, see, that's the thing. I don't know.
I didn't see the helter skelter angle, but like just easily manipulated.
I think
architized.
We've talked in previous like CONTRA chapters and elsewhere about the benefits of like sort of deep state or organized crime drug trafficking or flooding a population with drugs, like different benefits of doing that aren't just about making money, because sometimes I think that's like a ontological trap or something, or maybe I don't know, epistemological trap.
Yes, I think it is. I think sometimes there definitely are other objectives, and
I think it is about power at the end of the day. It's about power, influence, control.
But I know what you mean, where it's like, oh, well, it's obvious. The reason is obvious. It's just to make money. And it's like, no, they're sickos. They're trying to do something. Like,
it's worse than that. Like, it's worse than that. Like, you can't just stop at like, well, they are capitalists. So like, ipso facto, they just they're programmed like bots to just like want to make money. And that's why like these things are bad. That's oftentimes, I think, even in like mainstream documentaries I've watched like recently, maybe about like Epstein or things like that, is just like when they talk about like greed, I think we shouldn't undersell the depth and scope of like greed. It's not just about having a lot of money in your bank account, not for people that control this much wealth. This is on another sicko level, because once you accrue this level, as Alan Block said, that a serious crime community is like an organized system of criminal activity that has become powerful enough that sort of like public efforts to check it or stop it fail. That it basically is too powerful to fail, which means then you can do all kinds of things. I mean, the most obvious thing is like they're not just profiting, but they're like engaging in all kinds of like financial manipulation, almost like a form of alchemy, you could say. I think maybe Castle Bank would qualify. And just these interlocking like shell company corporate structures and like, you know, hundreds of Pritzker subsidiaries and stuff. But I think especially when you look at the later generation of Pritzkers closer to today, they're much more influenced. They're still doing all their business bullshit, but they're much more influenced on influencing the culture, influencing the political discourse, you know, and things like that. And I think those things do ultimately circle back to being about power and control, but often in like more indirect and expansive ways. So I think we want to keep like an expansive mindset as we go, as we consider their quite blatant criminality and perfidiousness. But yeah, so, you know, end verdict for anybody. I'm glad we got all that out of the way, because now like confirmed Gustavus Myers through fraud, through treachery, through deceit, through corruption, ain't nothing new. Every American fortune like masks the story of a crime. The Pritzkers are absolutely no different, and in fact are like highly representative of the extremely fuzzy, almost fake line between the overworld and the underworld.
Just got home from Illinois, locked the front door, oh boy. Got to sit down, take a rest on the porch. Imagination sets in, pretty soon I'm singing. Looking out my back door. This giant doing cartwheels, statue wearing high heels. Look at all the happy creatures dancing on the lawn. Dinosaur controller, listening to Buck Owens. Looking out my back door. Tambourines and elephants are playing in the band. Won't you take a ride on the flying spoon? A wondrous apparition provided by magician. Looking out my back door.
Good Pritzker background under our big belts, it's finally time to like pivot back to where we left off with the Castle Bank and Trust. All right. Now, I think it'll be good to know everything we now know about the Pritzkers, because they maybe don't get mentioned as much as we hyped up at the beginning of this whole thing in Masters of Paradise. Like, they almost might come off as like a tangential player in this whole thing, but I think reading Supermob, you see that they are intimately connected to like every major player in the Castle saga, maybe none more so than super tax lawyer Burton W. Cantor. So we're going to get into some of his shenanigans. Now, I think when we left off, the Castle Bank had first come to the attention of the IRS agents through that LSD manufacturer arrest. in Marin County, where it was found that he was banking with Castle through Suslord Paul Hellowell's bank of Perrine in South Florida. I think we had just held off when we had just left off. The head agent, Dick Jaffe, and Norm Casper, the true detectives running this whole thing, Operation Tradewinds, they had gotten the names of like a lot of the directors of Castle Bank. So they knew about Hellowell, they knew about Burt Cantor, but what they hadn't gotten yet was the client list, because everything they'd seen about this bank thus far seemed to them to be, this was like an offshore banking operation that was illegally like actually not moving people's money overseas, but actually keeping it in the US and using this like shell company in the Bahamas as like an accounting database to like credit and debit different clients for like withdrawing, their money and all that stuff. So they needed to they wanted to get the client list itself. And I guess the way they got it was a little bit wacky, because Norm Casper, he was working this one Castle officer named Gene Poe, who we brought up a little bit. And he had sort of psyop Gene Poe by saying that he was just investigating like drug money laundering, and, said like, oh, your assistance would be great, blah, blah, blah. And he didn't tell him anything that like, I'm trying to figure out like I'm trying to bust the whole Castle thing wide open. So apparently it worked. And then he scored a major coup because Poe introduced Casper to Samuel B. Pearson, who at that time was the nominal president, and also a tall and heavy set big boy president of Castle Bank. He says that Pearson's presidency like flip-flopped with Gooding's, only lasted a short time, part of the nervous restlessness that Sally had commented on. So they're like constantly switching their board of directors and their president around like multiple times a year. So Poe told the president of Casper's good anti-narcotics work. Sam then wrote a note on the back of his business card to Castle officer Mike Wollstonecroft. The message said, "Mike, give this man anything he wants." Casper was inside Castle by 1972. So that's when he first, I think, got to go inside Castle and like flip through some of the records. And that's when he first saw the name of like Richard Nixon, like on the ledgers, basically. So, but he needed to get like a full document. And yeah, he also saw Mo Dallitz's name and some other racketeers. And the method of him getting this client list came about through his friendly relationship with Wollstonecroft. Since they first met, Wollstonecroft confided to Casper an interest in extramarital female companionship. He often traveled and asked Casper to get him dates in Miami. Casper demurred just a bit and then agreed to help. Wollstonecroft and other Castle people frequently commuted from Nassau to Chicago to straighten out the bank's confused books with the Cantor firm's help. And that, by the way, is Levenfeld and Cantor at this point in the 70s. That's Burt Cantor's law firm. The confusion in accounts between Nassau and Chicago was partially caused by the new computer system, which befuddled many. They also mistrusted the Bahamian government's postal service. Castle, therefore, had instituted a policy of hand-carrying important documents to Miami and Chicago rather than using the mail. The opportunity to get the account list came in the winter of 1972. Wollstonecroft planned another Chicago trip and asked Casper to arrange a date for him in Miami. Such arrangements were routine by then. Casper suggested he see Sybil Kennedy, a woman he had introduced to Wollstonecroft a few months earlier. Wollstonecroft thought it a fine suggestion and called her. The Castle officer had not the slightest idea she was a former policewoman who is now a freelance operative aiding Casper. It was unknown to Casper that Wollstonecroft would be carrying the account list and the other important Castle documents in his locked leather briefcase when he arrived in Miami. The papers included, he believed, a complaint intended for Cantor's consideration, stating that Pearson and Hellowell were mismanaging Castle. So he concocted this like whole honeypot scheme where, Wollstonecroft would be picked up by this girl who he was going to sleep with, and they were going to go out to dinner, but they would stop at her apartment first. And they thought, okay, Wollstonecroft's going to leave his briefcase and other stuff there. And but I guess there was a legal problem because he didn't want to break into the apartment. So Sybil Kennedy gave him a key. And so he was able to just slip in there, and they got the briefcase, and they opened it up and found the account list and photographed and microfilmed it. So the documents were wondrously revealing. The master list of accounts had the names and numbers of over 300 individual and company clients, and other material found within the briefcase had the identification and location of around 39 U.S. brokerage accounts for Castle. They were very pleased. Then they were able to pluck the Rolodex by having Sybil Kennedy fly down to Nassau and rip it off. I guess there were also problems with it because they already anticipated that some people were going to be like, you illegally stole this list, so it's inadmissible in court and blah, blah, blah. And that it did become kind of a big problem for them down the road in like a very corrupt, hypocritical way. Like it was very classic, like higher ups telling them to like stop looking into this, and shit like that. But they do have the list. All right, now I'm going to move on to the next chapter of Inside Castle. At this point, once they had the list, they were able to like upgrade their operation to something called Decode, and then eventually that became Project Haven, which was like the ultimate like investigative unit that like went after Castle Bank. So they were watching Wollstonecraft in particular as he went around the country, like hand delivering, correspondence. Interestingly, like the day after his briefcase was snatched, they trailed him to Cantor's South LaSalle Street office. They were able to actually charge Wollstonecraft in 1976 with participation in a swindle based on phony silver options, refining contracts, loan advancements, and equipment options. And Castle was integral to that scheme. And I guess he just like stayed out of the country for a long time after that and like tried to negotiate with the Justice Department. I think he eventually ended up in Britain, but they noticed that this guy's like a mid-level player. Like this guy's not the big dog in Castle. So they wanted the big people, the prime players who were the lawyers behind the Castle conspiracy and the other major depositors who were clients of the Cantor and Hallowell firms. Now, he says something here that I think is like interesting in terms of still defining like what the fuck actually is this murky entity and what is it for. He says, Castle was not an organized crime bank in the way the Bank of World Commerce had been. That bank was formed by racketeers as part of a complex casino laundering scheme, though it may have had other purposes as well. Castle was a tax haven first and foremost, formed by lawyers who had mob connections and used from time to time to launder illicit funds generated by some, like Palmer, the LSD guy, and others, like Hitchcock, also the LSD guy. Its real job covered the panoply of white-collar crime, hiding otherwise legitimate profits, in aiding in financial frauds, evading taxes, and investing in various projects for its clientele, most of whom were not from the ranks of organized crime. Well, or not explicitly. To understand Castle's business requires more than the 1972 master list of accounts foolishly carried by Wollstonecraft and purloined by Casper. It provided a cast: Cantor, Hallowell, Roger Basks, Milton Levenfeld, Mary Jane Melrose, Morris Kleinman, Mo Dowlitz, Billy Hitchcock, Joel Mallon, etc., but it lacked any particular information concerning the accounts themselves. The master list is mute about the nature of Castle's investments as trustee for its depositors, the partnerships, and the quantity and flow of money. Fortunately, the account list can be supplemented by what were thought to be securely hidden Castle files left in the Cayman Islands by Hallowell and Cantor. And I think that had to do with like a second castle they set up in the Cayman Islands in anticipation if their spot got blown up in the Bahamas, they could just like switch it over there. But somebody was able to like get the cab, like this safe, basically. Donald Eve Van Cownet, who was, I think he was a lawyer in Florida who represented some Castle employees who were maybe suing the bank for various reasons. And he actually like hustled, he went down to the Caymans and like persuaded the attorney there to give him the cabinet. So he took it back to Miami and drilled out of it, like drilled through it. And he found all this material and partnerships, money transfers, and bank policy. And Block says there is now indisputable proof of the closeness between Cantor and Hallowell and how they directed Castle Bank affairs. What made this so convincing, of course, was the documents had been pre-selected by the conspirators themselves. So he goes on, talks about the racketeer Morris Kleinman connections are very deep. And okay, this is worth mentioning for a second, that Hallowell and Cantor were already avidly at work with another Kleinman Trust account, T1157, held by Mercantile Bank. A number of their deals involved Florida real estate. Kleinman's Trust had bought in 1969 50% interest in 344 acres in South Dade County called the Doral property. The other half was split equally between one of Cantor's Castle accounts and one of Hallowell's. Just real quick, I think we should mention, lest we forget, a lot of their deals involved Florida real estate. Now, it's in the other book, which we're not really going to like dive deep into today, but there's a very interesting connection with Paul Hallowell and this whole kind of castle crowd and Florida real estate. And we were talking, of course, about their interesting connections to Mr. Walt Disney and Disney World. So it turns out that the funds used by Disney to purchase the land for Disney World were from Mercantile Bank, the sort of weird fake holding company that like owned Castle Bank in the Bahamas. And in fact, Paul Hallowell was deeply involved in all of Disney's land acquisitions in Florida in the early 60s. And there's a particularly wild thing just on the Wikipedia here, a little synchronicity. So Walt Disney traveled to Central Florida in 1963. And I don't know if Hallowell was there with him, but somebody took him up in a plane to surveil some plots of land that he might pick for Disney World. And it just so happens that he was taking this flight on the morning of November 22nd, 1963.
Yes.
Like as JFK was being murdered, Walt Disney was like flying over Orlando and surveying the landscape of where his magical kingdom would eventually be built with like fucking CIA laundered money from like Castle Bank and Paul Hallowell.
It was a true Camelot.
It really was. Yeah, and this was actually, I think maybe we didn't get too much into like the Disney World part, and I think in our Disney episode, but there was a lot of like mystery, actually much like Disneyland, and how he seemed to really not want people to know like SRI was building it. In this, it was more like apparently this development was kept like top secret, and it was just called the Florida Project. So to avoid a burst of land speculation, Walt Disney Productions used various dummy corporations set up by Paul Hallowell to acquire 27,000 acres of land. In May 1965, some of these major land transactions were recorded a few miles southwest of Orlando in Osceola County. In addition, 2 large tracts totaling $1.5 million were sold, and smaller tracts of flatlands and cattle pastures were purchased by exotically named companies such as I-4 Corporation, Latin American Development and Management Corporation, and the Reedy Creek Ranch Corporation. So yeah, Paul Hallowell, there's old news articles you can find about like Paul Hallowell having dinner with like multiple Disney executives and like yucking it up. And they apparently, just like in, the Chicago outfit, kind of going around in like California and scooping up all of this land. You have kind of this like Hallowell Chicago outfit kind of network going on in Florida with the Disneys. Yeah, just to read from All Is Clouded by Desire, because actually this connects with like the next thing we're going to talk about, because we have yet another intra-contra interlock thing with our previous episode that has to do with BCCI. So going back to like the sort of the collapse of Mercantile Bank, which was, was the original nominal parent company of Castle that started around 1969, block rights in Masters of Paradise. Mercantile's downfall began as early as 1969 when the bank made several substantial demand loans to the numbered trust of its own American investors. The loans were used to purchase securities on a very large margin, which were traded on the American Stock Exchange. The securities were fraudulently used as collateral for the loans. The scam fell apart when the stock market drastically declined and the value of the securities plummeted. Mercantile needed the loans repaid. The trust couldn't cover the losses, especially because various guarantors refused to honor their guarantees. So what's a shady Bahamian bank to do? Faced with catastrophic problems, Mercantile's contemporary leadership, Inga Gordon Mosvold, Paul Hellawell, and his former OSS associate Demetrius Stampatos, the colonel,
Right, yes.
apparently conspired to, quote, disguise and conceal the existence of the defaulted loans in order to defraud depositors and creditors of the bank, as well as Bahamian government banking authorities. They filed phony reports and set up shell corporations, one in Panama and two in the Bahamas, to shuffle the disastrous loans around, attempting to create the impression they were soundly collateralized. So, I mean, they're engaging, this is just like messy, shit accounting. They're engaging in fraud. Now their balance sheet is all fucked up. They're totally a disaster. Who would buy such a bank, Khalid? Like, who would invest their money to save this bank, which seems like it's up to its eyeballs in crazy shit? Well, he says, the conspiracy took on a new dimension when officers from the International Bank, a bank holding company headquartered in Washington, D.C., decided to acquire 66% of the capital stock of Mercantile in the Bahamas and its subsidiary in the Cayman Islands. International's officers knew the actual state of Mercantile's financial health. During negotiations, they were told the bank recently had very serious losses, and much of the loan portfolio was tenuously secured by real property that was not, unfortunately, readily marketable. Unperturbed, they went ahead with the purchase, which closed at the end of March 1973. A couple of months later, they knew the seams every jot and tittle. Still, they didn't complain. On the contrary, they proceeded to lustily join in. So, like, they kept, I guess, what remained of the bank was drained dry through more fraudulent loans, at least $17 million, made to 7 companies controlled by the conspirators. These firms were primarily engaged in Florida land deals in the Orlando area. So, like, we're literally, I think, maybe talking about Disney World itself. Castle naturally played an important role in the bilking of Mercantile. The primary corporate villain in this round robin of fraud was a company known as DACA SA, which sat snugly as Castle Savings Account 504-110. In the summer of 1977, over 90% of Mercantile's claimed assets were actually uncollectible liabilities, too much even for the Bahamas. That August, the government revoked Mercantile's banking and trust license. The game was over at last. So, yeah, once again, it's Florida and all that stuff. But also, hold up, the International Bank. Where have we heard that recently? That was the sus bank in Washington, D.C. that was controlled by George, I believe it was General George Olmsted, this kind of weird, like, Cold War CIA money manager / insurance man kind of guy that ran this, like, mysterious bank. And I believe that was one of those rare banks that could operate in multiple states, right? Back when that was mostly illegal. Mm-hmm. And then it eventually evolved into maybe FGB, like First General Bank Shares, and then it evolved into First American Bank. And then that was the bank that allegedly BCCI bought in the early 80s, and then was kind of like became a vector for all of their activities. But, you know, as we talked about at length, a lot of it was kind of like Muslim coded to be like, oh my God, this like scary Muslim bank bought this American bank, taking over everything. When in fact, it almost seems like that wouldn't have happened. A bank like First American / International Bank, which is literally plugged into like so much shit. They also, we should add, manage the Liberian Maritime Registry, which was set up by the CIA and like Edward Stettinius Jr. and was, you know, the Delaware for international shipping, almost like a proto-castle type of thing. So they were like totally up to their neck in spookery. But then, I guess they just slipped up, and like the former Saudi intelligence chief and Aga Hassan Abadi fucking just bought them, and nobody could stop them. You know, I think we pretty definitively kind of like debunked that perspective on it. Though, I mean, the BC there are kind of multiple BCCI sort of interlocks between Castle Bank and some of the same people running the same shit, but of course, we're talking a little bit more on like the American side. And, you know, I think given the context of this being a kind of CIA connected tax shelter bank, I think, it's just interesting. Oh, but the next section actually here, I think I can't not read, because he's talking about Morris Kleinman was a very important Castle depositor and perhaps a hidden owner, but by no means the wealthiest. The most affluent were members of the fabulously rich Pritzker family from Chicago, clients of the Cantor firm. Boom.
Wow.
Clients of Levenfeld and Cantor. Remember that. In approximately 40 years, this family rose from relative obscurity to incredible affluence. The Pritzkers' best-known company is the Hyatt Corporation, which features the famous hotel chain. Cantor, one of their attorneys, served on the Hyatt board of directors. By 1980, just 3 of their many holding companies reportedly generated revenues exceeding $3 billion annually. The Pritzkers embody that old maxim of the rich, which holds that if you can count your money, you're not that wealthy. In the mid-1970s, it was reported the family's holdings were far too numerous for any member of the family to remember them at any given moment. Like many others with so much money, a little digging into their background produced troubling questions. It was discovered the source of some Pritzker money came from the racket-ridden Teamsters pension fund. One deal in particular...
I'm just thinking of Mammon Holding.
Oh yeah,
Sorry,
yeah. Shit code alert. Yeah, that's so badass.
That's such an amazing sense of humor. Oh wait, I forgot. It's not called that. It's just called Mormon after some fucking rich guy.
Yeah, exactly. We see all out here.
I guess I don't have a badass sense of humor.
So, so of course it was discovered some of their money. I know, right?
I feel bad for I'm trying not to swing at these people so much, but it's just like so cringe. Anyway,
it's the urge to go on a rant about Levenfeld and Cantor and maybe like who was one of the 15 lawyers that was working there during this period is something maybe we'll get into at the end. But sorry,
they
dear
should
listeners.
have taken some lessons on how to say no. I won't join your law firm.
Well, interesting. Well, okay, so yeah, we know about the Teamsters pension fund, but hey, one Pritzker deal in particular stood out. This was their purchase of a Nevada hotel and casino owned by the pension fund, in which the Pritzkers were assisted by a $30 million pension fund loan. The loan, in turn, was secured by another Pritzker casino venture, the Four Queens Hotel and Casino in Las Vegas. Yeah, right on Fremont Street. The Pritzkers had several casino interests, at least one of which also involved another castle depositor, Hugh Hefner of Playboy. Hey, Hefner's ill-fated New Jersey casino venture, the Playboy Hotel and Casino, was partly owned 46% by the Pritzkers. I wonder if they're hanging out in Lake Geneva together, because you know that the Pritzkers summer there.
Right, yeah, I remember you mentioning that.
Yeah, I was almost bummed out that it wasn't the Lake Geneva Playboy Hotel that the Pritzkers were invested in. Though, actually, I mean, they could have been maybe on a smaller level invested in it. I guess it was ill-fated. But Hefner, by the way, is also somebody who had kept money in Castle Bank as well. So...
Yeah, this gets really intense now.
It does. Yeah. We're really going to be spiraling around.
This is like the precipice of,
the madness of quote unquote business. So investigators probing the Pritzker empire were intrigued by its connection to the pension fund. This was especially so when it was learned that both Jimmy Hoffa and Alan Dorfman personally worked on Pritzker loans. The major Pritzker link to the Teamsters was crafted by Stanford Clinton, a former associate of the Pritzkers law firm, Pritzker, and Clinton, a man who represented some of Chicago's leading hoodlums, and after becoming general counsel of the Teamsters Pension Fund, assisted the Pritzkers in obtaining pension fund loans. The Clinton family, like the Pritzkers, was in Castle Bank. They had settlement account 705062. So there you go. Wow, general counsel of like the sus Teamsters Fund, Stanford Clinton, and I think he has a law fellowship. I want to say at the U Chicago Law School, named after him. Either that or a professor chair is like the Stanford R. Clinton Senior, like legal excellence chair, and like whatever the fuck.
Yeah.
So that also I did.
Are you sure it wasn't at Northwestern?
It might be Northwestern. It might be Northwestern.
Yeah.
Their names, because there's also like the Pritzker, like the Pritzkers have named several schools. They might have the Pritzker School of Law at U Chicago.
Yes, in Stanford Clinton's case, it is at Northwestern. I was looking him up because I was like, is he related to the Clintons? Like, that would be great.
Well, because Clinton is allegedly, you know what? He might be another one, because remember who was like randomly governor of Arkansas around the time that Bill Clinton was born?
No, I don't. I don't remember.
A gentleman named Winthrop Rockefeller.
Oh, okay.
Brother of David and Lawrence.
Mhm.
I mean, there's been like whispers about that before. That's like, oh my god, like he's like a an illegitimate Rockefeller or something. But that would be
I
another
see.
one to add to they love doing this. No, but yeah, his dad, like he wasn't raised. His dad was nobody apparently like substantial. There is the Clinton. I think there was like a General Clinton or Governor Clinton of like New York back in the Revolutionary times. So he might be from those Clintons. But the name like Stanford Clinton. Talk about like last name is first name flex, right? Like I don't know which Stanford
it's
that's
weird.
referring
Why
to,
is he-
but
Why is Bill Clinton called Bill Clinton if his father
his
wasn't a Clinton?
Oh, well, actually, I'm either getting it mixed up right now. Either his biological father was not named Clinton, and then he was mostly raised by his stepdad, who was Clinton, or was the other way around? His dad was
I guess
Clinton,
I don't know
but he
too much
died.
about Bill Clinton's background or childhood, but yeah, William Jefferson Blythe Jr.
That's
is
right.
his
Okay,
real
yeah.
father.
Yeah, he adopted, and I don't think his
Yeah.
stepdad was like a big muckety muck necessarily, but might have been actually. I wouldn't. I mean, he did go and become like a Rhodes Scholar and go to Ivy League schools, despite being a kind of like country boy from Arkansas. You know, so there's room for murkiness there, and especially if we get to Obama's kind of background, I think at the end of this, which does intersect with the Pritzkers, there's stuff like there's some murkiness there too. But anyways, yeah, I don't know more about Stanford Clinton except that he also went on to have like a substantial relationship with Cantor's law firms going forward, both Levenfeld and Cantor, and then Neil Gerber and Eisenberg. And lawyers for that law firm managed the trusts of and the wills of, I think, both Stanford Clinton and his widow. So there's that.
Yes, he worked at the law firm of Pritzker and Pritzker for 30 years, during which time the firm became Pritzker, Pritzker and Clinton, as he said.
Mm-hmm.
He was the youngest person to be admitted to practice before the U.S. Supreme Court.
How about that?
Wow.
Interesting. Okay, so moving forward, there's actually a couple. Oh yeah, the other weird thing is that in the archives.gov website, under the sort of JFK research file of like declassified documents about Stanford Clinton, or about the JFK assassination, there's a declassified FBI memo, I think from 1960, that mentions Stanford Clinton as a lawyer who is representing a guy named Anthony Accardo, who I believe is like an organized crime associate or something. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it just says there's some conversation that's not attached, but they said the reference to Clinton is reference to Stanford Clinton, who was an attorney in Chicago and who was one of the attorneys representing Anthony Accardo in his pending trial. It is obvious the conversation concerns the trial of Accardo, who has been indicted for fraudulently charging expenses for the use of his automobile, which he claims he used to sell Foxhead 400 beer for the Premium Beer Sales Incorporated, blah, blah, blah. And then it goes on to talk about like known hoodlum associates that control unions and shit like that in this report. I'm not sure like why. This must be from some FOIA request about like mob connections, the JFK assassination or something. So I don't know. It's just, Stanford Clinton is known for representing like Chicago syndicate associated people and the Pritzkers, and was like the law partner of the Pritzkers. So it's all one big kind of family going on here. So yeah, Mercantile Bank. Then we have like, bizarre purchase of 66% of Mercantile by the International Bank. And then, okay, they talk about, there's a little episode here, kind of a little spin-off, a little side adventure that Cantor goes on, where they get into like the St. Martin Island, which is actually, it's funny that you mentioned in the previous episode, like, centuries old conflict between like the Anglo-Dutch, rivalries and shit, because Block does kind of bring it up, talking about how, this island is only 37 square miles, but it's cut in half. The northern part is a French colony of Saint Martin, and the southern one is a Dutch one. I don't know how to say it. Sint Maarten. Yeah. And it's literally a product of the Treaty of Westphalia, which, which ended the 30 Years' War in 1648. So it's been like basically like culturally divided for 400 years. And I guess the Dutch, Sint Maarten, is the side that's given itself way more over to like American tourist culture. So all these people, including Resorts International, were trying to get in on the Dutch side to build a new resort company. And Susslord, J.J. Frankel, and also maybe Joel Malin kind of get involved with it. There's a lot of shady financing, kind of involved with Denver oil man John King, who I don't know much about. But yeah, there was like a failed resort called La Belle Creole, which somebody called the ruin of an obsessed man's dream. So Frankel was the guy who like set up the Mary Carter Paints like Crosby deal to begin with and got this thing kind of running. And then I think he went and tried to set up a resort on the French side, but I guess he had fucked up because the land title he bought was like legally unclear. The project got shut down. And then much later, Hilton, another company, by the way, that is like linked in with the fucking Chicago syndicate, came in years later and built it. But both resorts and Castle Bank had people going to the Dutch half of the island. They were all focused on a resort complex along the beautiful beach facing south-southwest called Mullet Pond Bay. The Mullet Bay Beach Hotel and Casino opened on December 1970. Now, here's an interesting name. The interest in the area started as far back as the late 1950s when Henry Ford II considered building a home somewhere in the Caribbean. He sent one of his company executives, Herbert Mercer, as an advanced scout, and with a local guy, they flew around looking for real estate. They cruised over the Mullet Bay section of Saint Martin and thought it was a really good site. The Ford executive agreed. He relayed that to Henry Ford II, and they got involved. So they built a company called Island Gem Enterprises, registered in the Netherlands Antilles to act as developer. Early on, Mercer brought in, who else? The Levenfeld Cantor firm, both to act as tax counsel and help plan the development. Joining Burt Cantor in legal work for the venture was his younger brother, Carl Cantor, a lawyer with the prestigious New York firm of Strook, and Levant. That's all, buddy. They got some old Dutch law firm. Carl Cantor prepared the prospectus for Island Gem's successful fundraising and remained associated with it through at least 1981. Henry Ford II and his beautiful, vivacious wife Christina, Herbert Mercer, and several other Ford executives, such as Lee Iacocca, bought Island Gem stock. They weren't all Island Gem insiders, however. Those truly on the inside paid far less than the average for Island Gem stock and had Castle Bank act as their trustee. So the stock usually sold for $10,000 a share, which is what like Ford and Iacocca and I'm sorry. Well, yeah, Iacocca had to pay $10,000 a share. Christina Ford, however, bought her shares for $1,500 each. Herbert Mercer, Burt Cantor, and his close friend Chris O'Donnell purchased theirs for $625 a share. So did Edward J. Garrett's head of a large construction company, which actually built the resort. So yeah, wow. So that's so many. $10,000 a share versus $625 a share. Very cool. Also interesting, Henry Ford II. Oh my God, he pops up everywhere. We've seen him mentioned. He went to Bohemian Grove. He founded the Ford Foundation, which funded our favorite radical radio station, KPFA. He funded also Kenneth Anger through the Ford Foundation. And also I noticed in Supermob, it mentioned that actually part of the like unique structure of Hyatt and the Pritzker family's growth was that they never financed hotel projects completely by themselves. That was like a maxim that they lived by. They would basically like get the project rolling because, you know, it might take 5 years to build a hotel and it's very expensive before you see any profits. So they would put up like an initial seed capital and then they would convince companies like the two he mentions are the Prudential Insurance Company and the Ford Motor Company to put up the rest of the capital to actually pay for the building of the thing. So actually, you know, the Ford Company and the Pritzkers had an interesting financial relationship that you normally wouldn't think about. Like, well, no, Ford, they make cars and Hyatt builds hotels. Like, what could they have? But no, it's all capital at the end of the day, right? So they had economic entanglements even in like the above ground economy. And it seems that they were doing a lot of shit together on the down low as well. Yeah, so that's Henry Ford II, and they engaged in a lot of land fraud. Yeah, there's a Toyota fraud and tax scam that was related to Florida real estate package, and yeah, just more and more stuff. And actually, one of the partners in one of these Florida land deals were with Saul Zantz, who was best known as the producer for One Flew Over Cuckoo's Nest and Amadeus. And he had 2 trusts in Castle. We're going to talk about him next in a minute and what he did to one of America's favorite boomer rock bands because it wasn't cool.
Okay.
Yeah, so I guess, this is also, he spends a lot of time talking about the Mullet Bay Casino Resort because it was one of the projects where the Resorts International people and the Castle Bank people basically came in together on the same project. Like there was financing from both, but then they hired Intertel for security and also Island Gem and Eddie Cellini, the old gangster who ran one of Meyer Lansky's casinos. So that was like a joint venture on their part. And there was more Teamster money. Oh, and this is actually also funny. Burt Cantor actually did Resorts International a little bit of a favor earlier on in the Bahamas. Burt Cantor stated that he labored to find a reputable outside hotelier to manage the Paradise Island Hotel in order to satisfy a Bahamian government concern. There was reasonable doubt that a paint company, even one in partnership with Huntington Hartford, had the necessary expertise to handle a resort hotel. The Bahamians were right, and the original Paradise Island Hotel was managed by Lawrence A. Tisch's Lowe's Corporation. Damn.
Oh, hey.
So yeah, of the Tisch School of the Arts. Great philanthropist. And also a guy I looked up, like really also like a scrappy, like Brooklyn Jewish guy that like built his way up from relatively nothing. Maybe not nothing. His dad might have owned a garment factory, actually. And then he's actually came more from like a Trump kind of background where like he inherited, like his parents gave him like $1.5 million and then he blew it into billions kind of thing. But
yeah, his name's all over the place.
It's all over the place, which you got to wonder, like, I feel like the more somebody's name is everywhere, the more sus they probably are. Like it's a general rule you could kind of live by. And he parlayed that into becoming head of CBS network, like I think in the 70s or the 80s. So he got into all kinds of, once again, like kind of coming from different businesses like into media and then also managing Paradise Island for a little while, in their kind of sus resorts heyday. So yeah, so they had plenty of connections between resorts and Castle. Okay, yeah, I'll just read to end the chapter here. He says to debunk the haters and the lawyers. Yeah, he says that Cantor and Hellewell were indisputably Castle's owners, managers, administrators. They were aided in these tasks by members of the respective law firms and individuals like Gene Poe from controlled institutions such as the Bank of Perrine, which was of paramount significance in the conspiracy. The conspiracy was so complete that Hellewell, Cantor, Melrose, and a few others held the vast majority of Perrine Cutler Ridge shares through corporations named HMT and Florida Shares. This is actually kind of weird. Skipping ahead, Gene Poe, the informant, one of the Castle guys, starts to he has a weird encounter with Casper, Norm Casper, the, I guess, sort of like undercover investigator. He called Casper and invited him for an important chat over lunch. Poe had several items he wanted to confide. The major one was that he and Hellewell thought Joel Mallon was a crook, that Cantor still associated with him, and they could hardly stand Cantor anymore. Poe said that the Hellewell people were doing everything they could to dissociate themselves from Cantor and his group, but it was hard. He had to understand. Poe offered Casper the complete cooperation of the Hellewell side in pursuit of drug dealers in Castle. He stated categorically and in good faith that Hellewell wanted nothing to do with money from narcotics or organized crime. Okay. Then came the warning. Poe confided Cantor was exerting a lot of pressure in an attempt to identify the man who had been snooping around Castle, talking to Wollstonecroft. No question his cover was safe with him, said the banker, but Cantor already, quote, knows you live in Key Biscayne. Be very careful, Poe suggested. There was one last twist in his talk. Dramatically, and certainly enigmatically, Poe said, when I signed up for 20 years, the agreement was that I could not talk for a number of years after my contract is terminated. What? Surely this is also true for Casper, he quickly added. Now that the secret was out, there was an offer of elderly comradeship. While the proper time comes, quote, if we are both still alive, I would like to sit down and compare bedtime stories. But raising the specter of the CIA did not impress Casper. He understood the chat was designed to give him conflicting and tantalizing messages as part of the information and disinformation process. Interesting. So that sounds like it's an allusion to being, when I signed up for 20 years, you don't sign up for a bank for 20 years, do you? Right?
Generally not when you're signing up opening a bank account.
I mean,
No.
signing up to take a job at a bank, right?
Generally, no.
I don't think even
You don't pledge your soul to a bank for 20 years.
No, you don't like cut yourself over like a piece of parchment and like swear a blood oath or anything like that. And I think even for the mafia, yeah, I think it's kind of like either you're working ad hoc or you're in it for life, but there's not like, all right, you're going to be in the mafia for 20 years. Like you're signing a 20-year contract. I think the only people that might do that are maybe intelligence agencies like the CIA. You know, so he's hinting at that, but it's interesting that like Casper thought maybe he's psyoping me and playing mind games or whatever. But he did seem to be genuinely, Poe seemed concerned with his own safety and was like a little bit afraid of Burton Cantor. And he also told Casper that Project Haven had sprung a large leak, which meant Cantor was receiving vital information. That was interesting because it became very obvious throughout that like there was a leak somewhere in the IRS or the DOJ that was like feeding Burt Cantor every step they were making against him. And it was like obvious, but they could never find out like how he was getting that information. But there's definitely like some corrupted individuals like working in the government. There was some bullshit about bureaucratic bullshit that they had to deal with. Yeah, Poe, I think related another like conversation that he was privy to. Yeah, the report contained something about the Howard Hughes investigation and named the IRS agent in charge. They knew about the Wollstonecroft surveillance in San Francisco. I'm trying to see where they got this conversation. Okay, yeah, here it is. In August 1974, Cantor and Hellawell had a strategy session in which Poe and perhaps another, racketeer Kleinman's nephew, Al Morrison, attended. Cantor read from a secret report containing details about Haven. So, okay, yeah, I guess this was relayed by Poe. He's like sitting there reading like, all right, here's the top secret information that I got. So Cantor reported that the project goes on even though we keep poking around trying to put on pressure. He asked Hellawell to check out whether there was any State Department involvement in this investigation. If so, he added, while Hellawell murmured, that would be very helpful. Interesting. So you want the State Department to be involved because you're doing what exactly? Hellawell piped up and forcefully stated that if we can get rid of stocks and bonds as an issue, quote, if we eliminate that, we eliminate, rackets, mafias, and all this damn foolishness. They both talked a great deal about playing tough from now on. Hellawell remarked he was about ready to close the investigators out of the Perrine Bank and go to court. Cantor chimed in, quote, now, we made the same threat, and we're making it more and more affirmatively. We've indicated that not only will we shut everything down, by everything, you have no idea the scope of audits all over the country that will be shut down. But we may bring separate lawsuits, and we have been exploring the theories of injunction, theories of restraint, restraining orders, and other suits that we could bring in certain districts that are sympathetic to taxpayers and taxpayers' representatives as distinguished from this one. They also mentioned, rather mysteriously and cryptically, quote, the political matter, the overseas political matter, and whether those people will go to bat and say, yes, we did it. What? I have no idea what they're talking about, but our imaginations could run wild. So their particular anxieties were showing. For Hellawell, it was primarily the stocks, bonds, and checks cashed at Perrine, while for Cantor, it was making sure Hellawell didn't divulge any of their secretly leaked government information and keeping the investigators away from American National Bank in Chicago. So he's very nervous about people poking around that. So they started like fighting back against the IRS, and like trying to avoid their subpoenas and kind of going back and forth. So eventually, I guess around the same time, or actually kind of through Watergate, but then up to this time, there's like a huge scandal in the IRS because I think Nixon appoints this guy, Donald Alexander. Yeah, Donald C. Alexander, appointed in April 1973 by beleaguered Richard Nixon. And he seems like an op, basically like a kind of a meathead, like Nixon op to be put in there to like, and he just decided that he like hated the intelligence division and that everything they were doing around Castle Bank was like total bullshit. They need to stop. And it's like not what the intelligence, unit of the IRS should be doing and blah, blah, blah. Really kind of like disrupted things for a while. And there was a huge kind of like internal battle, I guess, amongst, different, power players within like the IRS bureaucracy. But then, of course, like everybody gets fucked because of Watergate. I think Alexander does get replaced, but then I think even his successor just was like one of these kind of dumb bureaucrats that like, I think people came to like update him on Castle Bank, and he's like, why do I care if like Burton Cantor owns it? He was almost like willfully obtuse about it and just acted like, well, no, it doesn't matter. And, you know, there also around this time, he said there were a lot of like corporate bribery scandals in the 1970s going on with companies like American Airlines, Gulf Oil, which Billy Mullen Hitchcock is descended from, and Goodyear Tire and Rubber. He says Gulf's case is the most interesting. The bulk of Gulf's illegal contributions came through a subsidiary known as Bahamas Exploration, located in Nassau. For years, Gulf executives carried out surreptitious transfers of funds from Gulf to Bahamas X, which then dispersed the money. It was a massive exercise in bribery and, of course, extortion. In 13 years, over $9.5 million found its way into campaign coffers of the pockets of important politicians. Americans from both parties and every level of government, from the Pennsylvania Turnpike Authority to the White House, received in total about $4.5 million. The remainder, interestingly, primarily went to Italians, Koreans, and Bolivians. That sounds like some Wackel shit right there. Like,
yeah, possibly.
Yeah, so they bribed Richard Nixon $100,000 in 1972, skipping ahead to like 263. He talks about like finally they did catch them kind of vaguely doing so much shit that it got to a kind of impasse where they had to sort of give over they had to like sacrifice somebody to the IRS to settle this whole thing, especially after probably the late 70s when Castle kind of started to like wind down and collapse under all of this pressure. And I guess the person they chose was Roger Basks, who was from the Cantor and Levenfeld and Cantor law firm. He was the one guy who was like had to I forget which transaction it was, but it was very surface level. And he ended up basically doing 3 years in like a club fed, low security prison in Florida, and then got out and got his law license reinstated in Illinois and like moved on. And they said some people were arguing over Roger Basks getting popped and saying, on the one hand, like it shows how weak and corrupt the federal government is for not forcing him to like divulge the depositors and other connections and shit. And all that, so that in some, which I could totally buy, that's like an institutional, like a willful institutional failure to open this can of worms. But other people also said that like that was really the best they could get, because they did throw this guy in jail for like 3 years and really like come at him. But the thing is, he just didn't talk. They offered him plea deals, but he kept his fucking mouth shut. And I think that was like by design, you know, he gracefully took the fall and then spent a few years at the federal prison at Eglin Air Force Base in Fort Walton Beach. Wonderful. Oh yeah, it was over transactions, another big boy connection, over transactions from a bunch of like McDonald's franchise owners that had like reaped profits from selling back their franchises and then invested all their money through the Cantor firm and Castle Bank. And that's like what they ended up getting caught for. So like a relatively like small ball kind of thing, basically. And then they picked like one of the lawyers to be like, all right, Basks, like you did it. Okay. And then everything else kind of just got like swept under the rug. And also a guy named Jim Moran, who was a big time Chicago like car dealership kingpin. He also got hooked up with Cantor. But I guess this guy had like a third grade education. He was not very, I guess he was good at being a car dealer tycoon, but he was like a guy who grew up in the Depression, whatever. And he was not that sophisticated about, James Moran. And he ended up getting like fucked. And I don't know if he went to prison, but he was another one of the people, like he's kind of the only client that got like sacrificed to the feds for doing something kind of wrong. But then when you look at like, I don't know, everybody that was involved in like managing his money, all those people got away with it. Yeah, Block notes that the Castle conspirators must have been pleased that Moran was the prime target, their joy enhanced by looting much of his Castle money. It was hard to tell what embittered, who embittered Moran the most. The Moran prosecution was the culmination of Project Haven. It was the most the Justice Department managed after years of hard work, internecine warfare, very complicated power struggles, legal battles over important principles, high drama, lots of money, major crimes, and possible stupefying corruption. The criminal justice result had to be disheartening and disillusioning, although not surprising. Oh, here, you know what it was? It's like his defense in court was like, I got fucking took by these guys. And the courts are basically like, no, you didn't. You're a co-conspirator. But then like nobody else who created his family trust, like on the advice and initiation of Cantor, Basks, Hellawell, Don Mitchell, and Gene Rudnick, and like disappeared all his money, like none of them basically got prosecuted for anything. So he just got kind of like stuck with it and shit. Mm-hmm. So that was, I guess, lay down with snakes. But do you want to take one more quick break, and then I think we're right at the point. Okay. It's Credence time after this.
This is the unedited J.B. Pritzker, Rod Blagojevich, FBI Wiretap.
I hear that Madigan is pushing labor to try to push the Obama administration to put him in somewhere so they can clear the field for Lisa.
So is that interesting?
Yeah, Madigan's dropping dimes on him because Resco is connected to the Broadway bank, and the feds are looking at his bank. It's all Madigan's how he operates.
Oh, wow.
So he's trying to get Lisa a clear field.
I see. So let me just throw some odd idea. If it were true, what I heard, and it were real?
It could be. I mean, I'm just thinking that. I'll give you my read on it.
Well, I heard, what I heard was somebody who's close to Alexei.
Hold on, JB. Hang on one second. Hang on. Hey, go ahead.
I actually am calling you about, I think you appoint his replacement, don't you?
Ooh, interesting. Let's think about that. You interested in that?
Yeah, that's the one I would want.
How about this scenario?
It makes a lot of sense.
Listen, you're extremely open-minded, man. But don't rule yourself out completely on that Senate thing. That may not be. Look, you ought to see this list, huh?
I'm sure you got, yeah.
I've got a lot of factors to consider. I have to factor, what do I want to do? Where am I going? At some point I've got to support, provide for my family. In a perfect world, provide for your family, do good, keep some sort of viability, and get back in the game at some point, if there's any opportunity, but not at this level. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
If the Senate thing ever happened for you, my strong recommendation would be, you got to do it and say you're running again. Putting a guy like you there for just 2 years, I don't know.
I mean, thinking about the political problem, and the only way to make the political problem go away in that scenario would be, that I can think of, is to say he's not running for re-election, which doesn't do anybody any good, so it's probably not a good scenario.
No.
The treasurer thinks a different thing.
Yeah. You did. This is a good option. Keep going. Talk to me.
Sure, it's putting a business person in a business person's job.
Yep.
I think I would be able to get people like Bill Brodsky at the CBOE and people like Terry Duffy at the Merck to sort of stand up independently and say, we're suggesting to the governor that this is a good idea. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah. Listen, I think it's exciting.
I haven't called either one of those guys to ask them to do that. It's a brand new idea here, but I throw that out at you. And finally, look, even if none of those things make sense for you, I'd love to help you in any way I can, with any decision making you decide to, that you're going to get involved in. I for whatever it's worth, some of the players I know, and I would be happy to act as a little bit as an intermediary with the people that you don't want to have it, or the people you do want to have it, or whatever. So I just offer myself and my service to you.
Okay, but what do you do if you're me, okay? And, I don't give a what these the media say. I really believe we've done great things for people in Illinois. This Obama ran on my record, okay? He said he brought health care to kids. You know what I'm saying? He voted for it. He's talking about a Capitol building extending health care for working families. We've done 700,000 people have gotten it. He's talking about not raising taxes on it.
The only reason to do it is if he'll appoint you to something.
Well, but listen, I guess that's, but he and I were tonied up. Probably like to keep, that's another thing that's so galling. No one will love Tony longer than me. But what if, and I'm telling you, this could happen, because I know how Madigan is. He says, I'll give you health care, I'll give you a capital bill. Okay? I'll balance what works with you to balance the budget the way you want to do it. I'll raise taxes on people. You make Lisa the senator. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
That puts me in a moral dilemma. Because of all of the prospective candidates, when dealing with her, suing us to support Bush kicking 35,000 poor people off of health care.
Yeah, I know.
All that.
Let's do it. You should do it. I'd take that.
Morally repugnant. I'd probably have to do it.
I'd do it.
Okay, and then there's an AG I can appoint, JB.
You're doing the right thing for the people.
Are you a lawyer?
Yeah.
There's an AG that I appoint.
Oh, that's it.
You see what I'm saying?
Oh, there you go.
Don't rule that one out.
Okay.
I'm not promising. I'm just saying these are all scenarios. What?
A lot of things to think about. Let's continue the conversation another time because I got to run into. But Rod, I really, and look, I don't want to seem like I'm, out here looking for a job. I honestly, I'd like to help you, and I also think there's probably something I might be able to do. But the treasurer thing actually seems totally logical to me. It's not harmful to you.
If he ends up going there, I'll call you right away, and we'll talk about it seriously and get focused.
All right, man.
But there's other options. Don't rule them out. I'm not promising anything, but in my mind, you're there somewhere.
Well, you're kind. All right.
Okay. I'll see you. All right, bye.